in my whole career, I'm saying there's a few where I can pick out that say, if I hadn't been in that boat, we wouldn't have had the finish we had. And that was one of those races because we were looking at a sort of 4th place finish, essentially coming into the race, 4th or 5th. And we said, okay, look, if things aren't going well, we're just going to go for home with like 750 to go or a K to go or something. We were like, we'll be ballsy. We'll just go for it. And I remember getting to 500 gone. And I was like, we're going to get dumped out the back door. And I was like, okay, guys, I know we're not expecting this, but we're going to go for home. And they were like, okay. And we held on and got a bronze medal.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Last Stroke Counts. Today's guest is an Olympic silver medalist and former Oxford Blue. Please welcome Zoe de Toledo to the podcast.
Hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for coming. It's a fun one. It's also it's a double guest because we also have your miniature creation with you, Connor, the youngest guest. We know when he becomes a future rower / Cox, depending on the size he grows to.
Yeah.
That we'll be able to say we had him here first live interview.
Ready?
Another awesome one. Obviously, Olympian, a medalist, bunch of other things. I'll go down the list in a minute, but again, like just super easy one. Also easy that you live in Oxford, so that made sense.
Down the road.
And another person that we've had recommended by a previous guest, Ben Lewis, was like, you got to get Zoe on. So easy one to
live up to the hype now.
Well, yeah, but it's hard not to, there we go. I'll read some of this now and say, so Junior Worlds in 2005, bronze medal in the women's 8, won Henley 2008 in the ladies plate, was part of the same squad, and we'll get into that. 2009, world champion under 23, women's 8 again, obviously all Coxing. Senior Europeans, 2009, boat race 2012, Europeans and Senior Worlds 2013, 2014 again, European and Senior Worlds, like all of these A final finishes. 2015 European and Worlds A final finishes, 5th and 4th. 2016 you won the Europeans, and then obviously 26 Olympics and the women's 8 second silver medal. So
you've missed the fact that I've only ever done one race in a single scull and I won that, so I actually have 100% winning record.
Where was that?
Scull. It was at the Australian Youth Olympics against the men's Cox.
That's amazing.
And they were like, oh well, Zoe has done some sculling and can stay in a boat, but he's a guy, so that'll be a good race. We did a 500-meter race and he fell in 3 times.
And you just beat him over the line.
Snuck it over the line.
Also, that's brilliant.
So I've got 100% winning record in a single scull, which...
So you're better than any other row we've had on here. Yeah. So to start, like we normally do, obviously the interesting thing is how you got into rowing in the first place.
So I started at school, and my school, St. Paul's, had the boys' school had a great rowing program. The girls' school had a fairly mediocre rowing program, and we didn't start until J16 year, so only the last 3 years of school. And it was kind of considered a non-school sport. It was like an additional thing. So the school weren't really that interested in it, which has actually changed a lot in recent years. And we rowed out with the boys' school boat club, but they kind of just racked a few boats in there. I mean, and it was a fairly sort of low-key program. Our second 8 boat was a 20-year-old wooden end packer that it took about 15 people to carry. That was the kind of level compared to the boys' school with all their end packers and all their wings and stuff. And I had a friend who was a couple years older than me, and I think we'd done a play or a drama type thing together. And she was a rower, and she said, she was like, "Oh, next year you could row, and you're small and you're kind of loud and bossy, so Coxing you'd probably really enjoy it." And no one in my family had anything to do with it before, so I thought, I'd give it a go. So I went down that following year, that J16 year, and the whole way through the first year, I would say I was probably like one of the bottom ranked Coxes in the team. And I did I did a little bit of racing. The first race I ever did was actually rowing, because I'd gone down to Kingston Head as I wasn't Coxing. I was, like I said, I was the bottom. But they said, oh, come along and see what it's like, you know, be around the squad and stuff. So I went down, someone didn't turn up or someone was sick at the last minute. And they were like, right, Zoe, you're going to have to just jump into bow seat of the third eight, which is obviously the bottom boat. And I think I'd done a few, because the boys' school had a tank. So I'd done a few tank rowing sessions, but I think I'd actually been in a boat maybe 3 times rowing. And Kingston Head's really long.
Yeah.
It is a really long race. And I was just like, okay, well, I'll just have to do it. And the coach was like, look, I don't expect you to try hard, just try not to catch a crab and try and stay in time. So I just did that. I was like, okay, I'll just put it in, take it out, just keep doing that. And it was fine. And we didn't come last. I think we came second to last. So, you know, that was my first ever race. And then by the summer, the school had decided they wanted to send their first eight to Nat Champs when it was in sort of July. And the first eight Cox had some, because it was in the school holidays, so the first eight Cox had some family holiday. But second, they went down the list, second eight Cox had something else. They keep going down, everyone is busy, everyone is away, and they get to me and they're like, are you free? And I said yes. And basically the girls in the first eight taught me how to Cox in probably about a week and a half, and they kind of taught me the race plan. It was in Strathclyde, and we drove up there in the minibus, so it was like 7 hours or something. They taught me the race plan in the minibus on the way up there. And we went up and we won. And they beat crews that had been beating them all year. And, you know, so I think after that, I became a bit of a sort of lucky talisman, essentially. And then I pretty much wasn't out of the first eight for my last 2 years at school.
I think that's funny. Like a lot of people talk about, oh, you know, I got a lucky shot. I got a chance. Someone above me was ill and I had one go in the boat.
Yeah.
And they sort of see that as like a not necessarily a negative, but like, oh, I just got lucky.
Yeah.
But that's how it always happens.
You make your own luck as well to some extent. You have to be there and you have to be ready to take advantage. And it was the same in Junior Worlds, because I got to my last year and my coach was very good friends with Shep at Molsey, who was the chief coach for juniors. And he sort of said maybe October, November time, he'd said, oh, I'm thinking about sending a junior women's 8 this year. We haven't sent one in, I think it was 5 or 6 years they hadn't sent one. They'd never medalled in the event. And he said, oh, does anyone have any Coxes? And obviously he must have been having this conversation fairly casually with Rachel, my coach. And she said, oh yeah, I've got one. I can bring her down. And I used to go down to Molsey. That was I used to go down and do some rowing with their vets and things like that to try and sort of build my own skills. And I just went along really. And I got, again, it was kind of lucky because there were definitely better junior women's Coxes out there, but no one really turned up to trial. And then I think by the time we got to the sort of summer selection, maybe 1 or 2 others, but I'd been there all year and I ended up in the boat. And I mean, Eve Singfield, who I coached with at Teddy's the following 2 years later, was a coach there, and she always used to make fun of me because she was saying, "Oh, you were selected to Cox the junior women's 8, you won a bronze medal, but you couldn't land on a landing stage." And I was like, "Yes, that is correct. I really couldn't." So again, it was, to some extent, it was just, you know, I kind of chanced it and got lucky.
Baptism of fire, or just dealing with it, like you said, that whole attitude of turning up to an event and having to do something completely different, and that's just part of it. And I think the team mentality kind of fosters that, because you don't want to let your friends down. And
yes,
just putting yourself in uncomfortable positions, I think, is pretty key. And
that's one of the things that when I talk to Coxes now and they say, "Oh, what's the one thing you did when you were learning?" and not just learning the whole way through, was if I got offered an opportunity to Cox a boat, I'd take it if I could. And I did that the whole way through. I mean, I think in 2016, maybe 2015 or 2016, so either Olympic year or the Olympic qualification year, I was Coxing like Newcastle University, who needed a spare at the Met Regatta because someone asked me and I had the availability to. And you always learn something. You know, even if you're Coxing novices, you always learn something. And being with different teams and being with different coaches, you're going to get a different perspective on things. So that's what I always say to the Coxes that I talk to now, is especially at the beginning, but really the whole way through your career, if you get a chance to do something, just give it a go. And, you know, like I said, I used to go and spend a lot of time with the vets at Molsey, and they were great because they were desperate for Coxes. So they were always really happy that you were there, but they were very honest with their feedback, and they were pleasant about it, but they would always give me useful things to work on, and they were very nice, and they'd always, you know, take me for breakfast afterwards and whatever. And say, you know, oh, this was good and you could do this and that kind of stuff. So it was just an amazing learning opportunity, with no pressure on it as well. You know, there's nothing for me to lose in that situation.
That's awesome. So you're still doing that while you're at school?
Yeah, so I was doing it at school, and that was the thing, because my coaches were all Malsey. They'd kind of take me down there, and actually I think, I mean, they put me in any boat, and there was one day, I think it was in maybe my J18 year, when they needed a sub for their first date, their head of the river first date that was training, and it was all the Olympians. It was like Andy Hodge and all those guys, and they were doing pieces with a sort of old boys crew, but again, old boys, all Olympians, which Adrian Ellison was coxing, who was the cox of the 84 Steve Redgrave's gold medal cox sport, and they just stuck me in this boat, and I was like the 17-year-old girl who didn't really know what I was doing. And they were like, right, off you go, you know, side-by-side pieces down at Malsey, which was a stretch I knew a bit, but obviously I wasn't super comfortable with. And I was like, okay, well, just have to make this work. And again, they were hard on me, but they were great and they taught me a lot. So it was just, you just have to kind of get in these boats and hope for the best. Really.
Were you aware of who a lot of those people were?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think the only time I got in a boat and was more kind of awed was the following year. So my first year out of juniors, I took a year out to retake some of my A-levels, got exactly the same results, so it was a complete waste of time, and just doing some bits of rowing where I could, coaching. And I got asked to cox a crew for the women's head that was like the squad composite, basically. Because the current cox, Caroline, was coxing the Thames crew, which was essentially the sweep. That was where GB women's sweep were based at pre-Caversham. And I sat down in the boat on the first day, and Catherine Granger was stroking it. And I remember getting into the boat on the tideway and being like, okay, that's Catherine Granger. I don't really know what I'm doing here. I need to just pull myself together. So I think that was the only other time I was a bit like, oh God, what am I doing? Is this okay?
Absolutely. That would freak anyone
amazing.
out.
Yeah.
But again, she was great. So yeah.
And it just shows how hard landing a boat can be, and like how important it is to know, like,
well, something like the women's head, where there's actually like, and we started, because we were a composite, we started with the new starters. We started like 150th, then we had to sort of weave our way through novice crews, and we won. And it was it was amazing. It was such a great race, but it was, and Miles Forbes Thomas, the coach, was really hard on me. He gave no shits that I was 18 and like didn't really know what was going on. And the tideway was where I learned to row, so I was comfortable on the stretch. But you know, he was really hard on me, and he really made me work. You know, he made me work hard. So, but yeah, it was amazing.
It's a fine line, isn't it? Like, you do want honest feedback, but there's different ways that it can be given. I struggled at times at Leander when it cruise. No offense to Chrissy to name her out, but yeah, some of the boys were pretty harsh, and she would get very upset by it. And I think fair enough. Yeah. They weren't really packaging their feedback the right way at times.
And this is why I'm so keen now to work with coxes, coaches, rowers about developing coxes, because I think you see people give feedback to a cox in a way that they never would to a rower. You know, and coxes get this, like, no one will say anything to them for months, and then suddenly they'll get sat down with a feedback form in front of them, and you did this wrong. Do you remember 3 months ago when you crashed into something? Like, can you imagine coaching a rower like that? Can you imagine me being like, oh, Tom, do you remember 2 weeks ago you weren't really putting your blade in the water? Like,
and you call that crap.
It just doesn't make any sense. And so a lot of what I talk about is about, you know, giving actionable feedback. And this was something actually we worked on a lot in our, I'm jumping forward a lot, but our 2016, our Olympic crew was about you know, it's feedback to me, but also the way we talked to each other was every piece of feedback you had to give something, a way of fixing it, essentially. So it was never just, oh, the finishes are shit. It was, the finishes are shit, so let's try doing this. And we did a lot of work on making our communication clear and concise, which obviously from a cox's perspective is really important, but we also did it with the rowers, so about how we communicated. And one of the sessions that I used to hate but was really good for us was this session that we did, which was 9 by 500. Is it 250? I can't actually remember now. I think it was 9 by 500, and we do it at Caversham, and you'd have to do 500 on, then you'd have 250 to paddle, and then you do the next 500, and it was all kind of race pace or that kind of, race pace or above, basically. And it was really annoying because if you're in an 8, the stopping distance of the 8, like by the time you'd kind of wound down, you were doing the next piece.
Yeah.
So you had to be so on it, and it really forced it forced all of us to be concise with our communication, and you had to be, you didn't have time to chat about it. You had to be like, this is what I think we need to work on, and then I had to decide. If there were several things, I had to then filter that and decide, right, this is the one thing we're going to do, because a 500-meter piece, you can only improve on one thing. You didn't have time to do multiple. So I'd have to filter it and then be like, right, okay, let's start with this. So let's work on this technical point for that next piece. And yeah, the session was chaos always. I hated doing it. And I always used to get really annoyed because my argument was always like, well, if you're in a single, it stops much faster. You've got way more recovery time. And Tomo, our head coach, would always just tell me to shut up. But literally we had the same conversation every session. But it was really good for us. So it was, and that's how I kind of work with the coxes as well and coaches. And, it's not enough to just shout at a cox because they fucked something up. Like you have to give feedback. And that was what my 2016 crew were really good at. It was conversation.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. It was conversation. So we'd stop at turn around and they'd say, oh, I really liked that call. That really worked well. Great. I know to use it again. Or that would happen as we were rolling. Oh yeah, good call. Carry on. Or like, that didn't quite work for me. Can you think about a way to rephrase that? Yeah. And it was just a constant conversation. So I didn't feel like when I was getting feedback, it was aggressive and put upon, which is, I think, what you often get. You just get shouted at when you do something wrong, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it happens in the boat as well, whereas we'll shout at.
For sure.
One thing I try and tend to say to people when I'm coaching is, I don't care what you have got to say during the piece or during the rowing. I don't care how, it doesn't matter how you think you're saying it. I promise you it's coming across wrong.
Yeah.
Because when you're out of breath and it's the middle of cess and you go, put your blade in.
Yeah.
It's going to sound,
yeah,
it's not going to come across in the right way.
Yeah.
But the other point, I guess, it's really easy to bring criticism with no solution. And it's quite hollow. So it's interesting what you say, if you want to bring something, well, what do you want instead?
What do you want to do? And I always talk about the shit sandwich. So you say something nice and then you say, oh, I really thought your catches were better today. However, I think you also need to work on this. But I think that's something that we can work on together. So you say something, you say your nice thing, your feedback, and then your nice thing again to finish it up. And I do that in my everyday life as well.
Yeah.
We're simple creatures as humans, really. It's such a different response. Compliment.
Yes.
And now I'll happily take
whatever
you have to say to me.
Yeah, I think it's also really easy to take good coxing for granted because if the cox is doing their job well, you feel like you probably don't need to over compliment or anything. But as soon as there's one thing that they could improve on this,
it's really easy,
immediately with just do this differently.
And I'm not a rower by any stretch of the imagination.
You have the perfect record in a single sculls.
I have the perfect record. That's true. So let's just... And I did also I did some rowing. We did this charity expedition in Zambia a few years ago and I rowed in that. We rowed 900k over 4 weeks in these big tub things. So I can stay in a boat.
That's a bit of Ollie Cook's stats.
Yes, Tim. Yeah, it was great. Yeah. But I have been in boats once in a while with coxes, just to kind of fill in or as a coach or whatever. And when bad coxing is it grates on you. It really does grate on you. And it's difficult not to get kind of annoyed by it.
Yeah.
You have to, I say, you have to think about how you'd coach a rower. And I've had coaches who've, there's a classic Andy Nelder, one of him just saying no. So every time, I think it was someone's catches they were working on, every stroke, he was just no. Blake said no. Blake said no. And I think at one point he went, you're just giving me a whole bag of no here, and then no.
That used to be a little Chris Colleton trick as well. I've heard that enough times. But me personally, now I went through one winter in the pair with Webby, and I honestly, I couldn't believe how Ali read my pair's partner just dealt with the fact that Chris was just all he didn't get spoken to or talked to or whatever. It was just work on Tom because he's absolutely useless and see if we can get him somewhere.
And he's too big to be that useless.
Yeah, and that's what got me to under 23s, I think, that year. A bit of help from Chris.
Whole bag of no.
Yeah. Or the other one I think I told already, but it's quite funny, was you'd be coming up on the other side of the river, and like Chris would shout stuff at us sometimes. And one time he just both of us just hit like, and I'm like, Webby, did you get that? And he's like, no, I didn't get it. Like, what should we do? Let's pull harder. So we pull harder, and then 3 strokes later, good change. We're like, oh yeah, it worked.
We did it.
If in doubt, pull up.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a good one. So you say you sort of fell into Junior Worlds, although I think you're putting yourself down a little by that point. But that's your final year at school?
Yes.
So then finishing school, what you did next? Were you thinking, I want to keep doing this?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was. And I think at that point, so I was trying to balance academics with and finding a university program I wanted to do and could get into with the rowing stuff. So I kind of I made some bad mistakes. I made some bad decisions. I made some good decisions, but I had a place at Edinburgh, and I had a place at Durham, but it wasn't on the main campus. It was on their Stockton campus. And I kind of decided that I wanted to be nearer here because Caversham was just coming into, I was one of the first people there, actually. It was just starting up. So I wanted to be down here, which obviously nowadays, people are going off to America and stuff. But at that time, especially for the Coxes, it felt like you needed to be there and you needed to be turning up and you needed to be seen.
Plus, any chance to not go to Stockton is a good chance.
Yeah. And I didn't have a place at Reading, but Will Rand, who was the head coach there, was kind of fairly convinced that I could get a place through clearing if I wanted to. So that was an option. But Reading, at the time, it was probably going to be a case of if I went to Reading, I'd probably do things like butts with them, but row at Leander. And then I started looking at Brooks. And at the time, Brooks was not what it is now, but it was still an incredible program. It was still one of the best university programs. It just wasn't what it is now, which is like a league above. I started looking at Brooks, and Richard Spratley basically said, yeah, it's fine. Oh God, this is awful. He was like, you can just apply onto any degree you can get onto, and then you can switch to what you want to do when you get here. And obviously, naively, I was like, sure, that sounds like a good idea. And I thought, well, Brooks is it's a good place for me in terms of the rowing. Obviously, it's nearby, etc. So I applied onto whatever. He was like, whatever has a place and you can get onto. And so there was a course that was exercise, health and nutrition or something. It was a sort of sports science type thing. I was like, okay, I can get onto that. I wanted to do psychology. I can get onto that. So I got into it. And I realized that obviously Spratley was talking absolute shit. You can't just change as soon as you turn up. So I ended up doing this degree for the first year. They said you can change in your second year, but I ended up having to do, because Brooks was more of a modular course. So you had core modules, which you had to do for the degree, and then ones you could pick. And I ended up having to do basically the core modules for the course I was on and the core modules for psychology so that I could switch into it in my second year. So it was just total chaos. And the course I was on was not stuff I was interested in. So I was like, just didn't want to be doing any of it. And on the rowing side, I kind of enjoyed it. I was getting into it, but I found that, and I think it's totally different now, and I kind of wish I could go again with what they're doing now. But I felt like, whether this was true or not, my development wasn't their priority, which it probably wasn't, but it felt like their priority was using me always to service provision to keep, their boats rolling. So it was things like, whenever we did big events, I'd get bumped down for people like Caroline O'Connor who'd come back, who's in the squad, which was kind of understandable, but I still found frustrating. I felt like, I think I was invited to like final trials or something, and they decided it'd be better for me to stay at Brooks coxing the novices rather than going. So it was stuff like that just felt like they weren't really putting my development at the forefront. And it might have just been me being sensitive, but I decided after the first year there to look at other options and contacted Mark Banks at Leander,
Yeah.
And he said, our job is our job here at Leander is to win Henley medals and to get people into the international teams. So if you want to do those two things, come here and we'll help you. So from my second and third years at Brooks, I didn't row with them anymore. I was moving over to Leander instead.
I think that kind of ties in what we've heard from other Brooks athletes, is that Brooks is all about the team mentality.
Yeah.
They foster the team mentality, and that's how they have become so successful. I'm sure other things have come in place. But also, like for me around that time, because I went to Leander in 08, like the guys who went to Brooks, like Scott Durant and Matt Tarrant, like they were already great rowers. They'd already made GB at junior level. And then Brooks like fostered this mentality and taught them how to row like men, whereas like I kind of probably had more the mental toughness, but I wasn't a very good rower.
Yeah.
So Leander was like the place where I was going to kind of learn how to row. So I don't think it's like Oxford Brooks is an incredible system. It's not for everyone, but nowhere is. So yeah, but like you said, it's
Leander worked for me perfectly. It was what I needed. So yeah.
So was your first year was 07, 08? Was that your first year? Yeah.
So yeah, same.
So we did it at the same time.
Yeah, because I turned up. Yeah, exactly. Because I did a year at Brooks and then went from the start in September 07.
So how did you find that?
I mean, it was very different, obviously, and I was still really young. I think that's the thing. Like 2008 at Henley, I would have been 20, not quite 21.
Yeah.
And a lot of the guys I was rowing with were, the Danny Marretts who'd won a gazillion Henley medals, Clive and people like that. So really experienced guys who had been around a long time and had done a lot of stuff. So it was quite a steep sort of learning curve. And I think, again, there were a lot of bits that went right and bits that went wrong. I mean, that crash, when I crashed that 8 into the barge, you wouldn't have been in that boat. No, it was at home. It was at Henley, at our Henley stretch before Henley. It was like it was like springtime. Yeah, it was like not as bad as I thought. That was the weird thing. So it was springtime, and I'd done, I'd been doing all right, and I was pretty sure I was going to get that ladies' plate 8.
Yeah,
but we had a boat that went out. It's just one of those weird sort of mornings. It was maybe like May or something, that kind of time. And we had this weird composite boat that was like Grand 8 guys, ladies plate 8 guys. I think Al Heathcote was in the boat, who was an international who had an injury, and he ended up going to Beijing that year. But I think he was doing some training with us while he was recovering or something. It's like a really weird mix of guys. And we were doing a piece upstream from the island up. And it was a quiet, like Wednesday or something, at 8:30. No, who's out at that time of day? And Chris Collerton was coaching, and he was on the bike. And we were down at the island, and we were doing, I think it was a 2K piece. And I had a look around, couldn't see anything. It's like, oh, it's a Wednesday at 8:30. There's no one here, and I'm going to stay right by the bank. There's not going to be anyone there anyway. And started this piece, and we were going really fast. Like the times were coming up, and I was like, this is insane speed for sort of upstream. I think it was a rate cap. I think it was like a 30-32, that kind of rate capped piece. It was like insanely quick. And we're like chugging along. And obviously I'm 5'1" on a good day if I've been hanging upside down by my ankles overnight to stretch me. And like, I think it was someone like George Lawton was sitting, all of you guys are big. Like I can't see what's directly in front of me is basically what I'm saying here. And we're going along. And suddenly I kind of noticed out the corner of my eye, like just a little bit of disrupted water in front of me. And I was obviously in my like more coxing position. And I kind of popped up, and there was a narrowboat right in front of us, traveling in the same direction. So it obviously hadn't seen us. And I just was like, oh, fuck, like hold it up. And we smashed into it. And it was a wing-rigged M-Packer that was really new, like really, really new. I think it had been used a handful of times, like top of the range, the whole thing. And it ripped the 2-seat rigger like completely off the boat. And it was Manchild who was sat in that seat, and it like ripped the rigger just off the boat. And then he was at 4. Sorry. So two rigger was gone. And then it smashed into his backstay at 4 and took off the backstay and like bent the rigger completely out of shape. But his rigger kind of hung on.
Yeah.
And Andrew Dax was sat at bow and was like traumatized by this because he, you know, if he'd hit it bow on, he probably would have been quite seriously injured. I think the only injury was that essentially as the 2 blade flew out, it hit Clive in the back because he was sat at 3. The blade like floats down the river and I managed to grab it as we go past. And we're all kind of sitting there and we're like, oh my God, what just happened? It's like properly, everyone was quite traumatized. And this was the man-child, and I think Chris was like, oh my God, like get back to the boathouse. And man-child just looks at his rigger and looks at Chris and goes, oh mate, I think my pitch is out. I was like, oh my God, what's happening? And we got back up, we got in, and I remember, and I think one of the guys, I think it might have been Clive, was like, just go home. Like, I was really shaking.
Yeah.
So just go home. And I got a call from Banksy later that day and I was like, this is him telling me not to come back. He's gonna just be like, I never want you down here again. Pick up the phone. And he starts kind of ranting. I was like, oh God. And he's like, I don't understand what happened. I don't understand how Chris Collerton could have just watched you row into a barge and not said anything. And I was like, oh, I'm not getting shouted at. This is surprising. And he basically blamed Chris.
That's good.
But then the worst bit was this boat they kept using as the first 8 boat. I think the Grand 8 rode in it. They got new riggers and stuff. But I think it was like, I think because of the force that we hit it with, it actually twisted the shell slightly. And I swear, like, that boat was never the same again.
So speaking of hitting things that you can't see.
Speaking of hitting things that you can't see, it was also, I was also found myself in a similar situation before Henley, probably around May time. We're doing A250s, just start practice, and I was steering a quad. So I was in the bow seat just before Henley 2016, and we were just doing them in the first 250 in and around the island. So we'd do the 250, spin around the island, then come back, and then just do it again. And then I've been complaining that the steering in the boat has been jammed for weeks and no one would listen to me. I said to my coach at the time, hey, there's something wrong with this steering. My foot is like this. And it's still not going the right way. Until eventually that day, obviously when we got up to like rate 44, going full speed quad, it's a really fast boat. And like obviously junior, so we're not technically all super lean or anything like this. So it's quite a big boat, quite a lot of speed going on there. And the coach says that she kept shouting at me to turn around and watch out for the island, but I did not hear any of this because we were doing flat out pieces. And then I'm like, I think to myself, like, oh, I haven't turned around for a few strokes. Let me just go and check that we're going straight because something's off. Like the bank's getting away. The bank's getting away from me a little bit too much. Turn around. I was like, oh, easy. And then we just hit the Temple Island, which I actually did go on like weather.co.uk and check the seismic movements of the river that day. It did move a few meters closer to the bank, so made me hit it. But then, yeah, I've also had that. I had to have that chat with Banks.
Yeah.
Well, I thought he was just going to be like, yeah, do not come back.
Come back here.
No, but so that was like the first time. I didn't eat anything 3 days. I was that like shook and stressed and like. Luckily, nothing too bad happened to any of the athletes, but the boat basically split in half. We had to like dock, and then we had to carry it from like
the island all the way back to the club.
Basically, yeah. And there was a 2015 Empacher, and that was in 2016.
Yeah,
I think you can, like most of the time when you're rowing, you don't have to think about that at all. And then something happens, and you're like, oh, I'm just sat in a piece of fiberglass.
Yeah,
like. Nothing's going to protect me if something goes wrong.
And I think that's something that I always took very seriously as a COTS was things like weather and that kind of stuff. And I think I was kind of aware of, I'd spoken to a girl who was coxing the Oxford lightweights crew out on training camp when Leo Blockley drowned. And she said, you know, there was a whole inquest and she was like, it was deemed not to be my fault, but I'll always feel responsible. And so I always used to take that very, very seriously, like if the weather was bad and stuff, and I would happily stand up to a coach and refuse to go out, basically, because I kind of had this idea that it was all on my, you know, this was my responsibility,
I think it's
basically.
important, and I think when people complain about safety, for example, I've been involved in the Oxford College, you know, constantly complaining about too many rules, too many this, too many that, and it's like, Yeah, but it's because you don't remember. Like it's
the
rules have worked so well.
Yeah.
But it's been so long since a boat has broken up and 9 people have fallen in the water.
Exactly. Yeah. Or someone's got smacked in the back, which still obviously happens at bumps.
Yeah. So actually, you having the ability to sit there and go, "Well, nothing goes wrong," like because they're there.
Yeah.
And I'd much rather like not have a safety incident because it can be pretty scary. Like, and also like the banter that you just get given from everyone the next day is like,
and the cost. I mean, you forget when you're just taking these boats out how much they cost. I mean, this is tens of thousands of pounds. Of equipment.
I was fully surprised they let me race at Henley that year, but I was very, very glad. I was still steering at Henley, so they didn't take the steer off me. But they did give us a different boat, and then the steering was alright in that one, so I didn't hit anything else.
You won't be the first or the last to have done it.
No.
We once had there was a really bad storm out in by Neolus, and we said we didn't want to go out, and Chris Collett made us go out. But then there was another time we were being coached by Beachy, and we were out on the water before it came in. You could roll in real quick, couldn't it? And we're rowing the racing way. So rowing towards the finish. Beach is on the launch there.
Yeah.
I'm sat rowing, and I can kind of see it's coming in. But then the flash from behind me, the loudest crack I've ever heard, and I just see Beachy in the launch go. He doesn't say anything to us. He just starts flying in. And without anyone talking, everyone on the outside just jacks it in. Slow cycles around. We're like, that just hit the lake.
You realise how exposed you are. That's the thing. Berezi was like that as well. It was the same kind of thing. You'd get these massive storms just roll in and they'd come out of nowhere and you'd be like, panic.
That's pretty much like when people ask me, like, when the weather's really bad, do you not go rowing? Like, no, like you go rowing in -5, you go rowing in snow, in sleet, in wind, in everything. Sometimes wind's awful. But lightning, no, we don't do lightning.
That's it,
yeah.
That's the bottom line.
So like I guess the rest of 2008 like in that Ladies Plate, like personally for me, it's interesting to hear another perspective on that year and how it went and how you found it.
Ben Lewis said it was like end of an era for Leander at that point. What did it feel like to be part of that?
The golden era.
I mean, we didn't know that at the time. That was the thing. We didn't recognize that. And Leander on such a roll, you just felt like you were part of this massive machine, basically. But that year was so much fun because we had, I felt like for us in the Ladies Plate 8, we had the perfect situation because when you're training in an 8, you want another 8 to race against from your club. And that's why, the best crews often have a great reserve crew. And we were in the middle because we had the Grand 8 who were sometimes faster than us, sometimes not faster than us. And we had you guys who were sometimes faster than us, especially over short stuff.
We got it right and you were having a bad day.
Yeah, exactly. So we had the best of both worlds, basically. But we also knew that we would beat you most of the time. We knew, so we kind of had this, just a great situation to be in. And I think from a coxing perspective, obviously we had Chrissy was in your crew who had been there for a bit longer. So she kind of showed me the Leander ropes, I guess.
Yeah.
And then Phelan, who coxed the Grand 8, who obviously then went on to move into the senior team the following year. And I think, I was really young and I was still quite inexperienced. And looking back on it, I was listening to some of what Ben was saying. I think looking back on it, a lot of what got me into that boat was the fact that, I could, other than that time when I smashed into the barge, I could keep the boat safe. I could roughly steer in a straight line. I was probably not going to do anything completely bizarre. And I could deal with the banter most of the time.
Yeah.
Probably better than Chrissy.
Yeah.
And probably in a way better than someone like Phelan could have done, I think. I kind of fitted into their chat, essentially. And I was going to listen to what Danny Marrett told me to do because he was sat at 7 and this man has won 1 million Henley medals. And if Danny Marrett tells you to do something in the middle of a Henley race, you're like, this guy has won. I think Steve Redgrave was one of the only people who won more medals than him. It was ludicrous.
Red's got a lot, but I think that Ben said he's on 9 now.
Something like that, yeah.
So I think the plate would have been maybe his 8th if he had one more.
Yeah. And so I was young and inexperienced enough to do what I was told, but I could also hold up, I guess, to their chat. So I think a lot of it was less, I think I was technically competent, but it was less about my technical ability and more about the fact that I fitted into the crew, essentially. But it was just such an amazing position to suddenly find myself in. because I was still young and inexperienced, and suddenly, the ladies play, the level of competition is amazing. I mean, winning the Thames Cup, as you well know, the level of competition is amazing. So to suddenly find myself in that kind of level of rowing, and I think it would probably be fair to say that ladies plate 8, I mean, it was the fastest British 8 at the time. There was the only other British 8, only other club 8 that beat us, club 8 that beat us, was our own Grand 8.
Yeah. Which was a national team. Which
was essentially a national team kind of development boat.
Yeah. I generally think for the most years the ladies plays, you win that, you pretty much the fastest club boat on earth.
Yeah.
If you're going to pick whoever comes over from America,
exactly,
it's going to be number 1 from America. You'll get someone from Europe if you can do them.
And we got, I think, the Dutch crew that we beat in the final was a sort of under 23-ish. So you often, that ladies play 8 should be able to go and at least medal in an under 23 event as well, essentially. And I think a good one could probably go and hold its own at a World Cup, for example, not necessarily World Champs. But so they were really quick, and I remember feeling very fortunate to have kind of landed on my feet with this. And it was essentially just about picking up as much as I could and like getting as much out of the experience as I thought I could soak in, essentially. But it was just really fun. Like, we just had a lot of fun. I mean, obviously there were bumps. I know Ben Lewis talked about that time in Banyolas when everyone went out, and Clive and I had an absolute hissy fit about it. So there were difficult moments, and there were difficult characters, but on the whole, there was just a lot of laughter and a lot of really shit chat, and it was just a really enjoyable experience.
Yeah, I mean, Ben telling that story of having to answer to the coaches the next day, asking him if he went out, and he was like, yes. And they're like, why? I thought it would be better for the crew if I did. I looked up.
Well, and I'd be like, sure, Ben, you went out to look after them, fine. But yeah.
Oh, the winter camp or the summer?
No, it was the summer camp. Yeah. So Clive and I were like, what the actual hell? Like, we've got Henley in a few weeks. This is not how we should be sort of doing things, essentially.
That camp was probably still one of the best of my life. Like, we had 3 8s. We had Al Sinclair's visitors 4. With like Matt Steeds was in that as well, and it was just like the numbers was great.
The weather was good.
It was a proper, like, apart from a few of the grand guys, almost everyone had been there all year, training together all year. There wasn't like a bunch of people coming back with different squads, like, and then obviously both 8s went on one, and that was the night out to remember.
I don't remember it. I just don't remember it.
I feel like I remember, but I think I just from the photos, from the photos, I'm picturing it in my head.
I remember waking up the morning of the final because we'd been put up because I was living in Oxford because I was studying at Brookes, and so usually when I come to Henley and if I wanted to stay overnight, I'd stay at the club. But obviously during the regatta, no one can stay at the club, so they'd put us up in a house in Henley, and I was in a room with another Cox. I think it was Courtney, who wasn't racing, but I think had been helping so much they'd kind of, she was, and I think she had gone out and kept going out and getting drunk, and I was getting pissed off with it. So I ended up the Saturday night, because I was like, she's going to go out and do the same thing. I ended up dragging my mattress into the room where Clive was sleeping, and I think he was on a sofa bed, basically. So Clive was on a sofa bed, and I'd like dragged my mattress into the corner of his room. So I was sleeping there. I remember waking up the morning, and I'd never felt so nervous. I was just like, I could feel my stomach was just like ripped into pieces. And I think I remember saying something to Clive, being like, I feel really nervous. He was like, don't worry, it's fine. I'm really nervous as well. I was like, okay. And Clive's obviously this like big guy, marine, you wouldn't expect him to say that. And I don't know whether he did or not, but whether he just said it to make me feel better. And then we went out to race, and we got out there, and the weather was fine, and it was like quite warm. We were like, okay, this is all right. And I was wearing an all-in-one and one of those like bin bag thin splash tops.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is fine. It's summer. It's July, much like a day like today. I shouldn't have trusted this. And we went up to warm up, and the race before us was on the start. And so we were just kind of in that bit just behind the start, like ready to go. And suddenly the heavens opened, and it was again like thunder, lightning, rain, the whole thing. And
they delayed, didn't they?
And they delayed, and they were like, everyone's got to get off the water. And it's like a little pontoon there, and we kind of managed to pull the boat in there. We all got out the boat, and there was a tent up at the start, and they said, "Oh, go and sit in there and wait it out." And then, obviously, we were all soaked, and then they said, "Okay, fine." Like, it wasn't a massive delay; it was maybe 20, 30 minutes or something. And then they said, "Okay, right, but we're ready to go back out there. You've got 20 minutes to warm up again, or 15 minutes to warm up again, and then you're going to race." And we were like, "All right." And obviously, we went out there, and I'm in a now soaking wet all-in-one, and this bin bag thin splash top. And obviously, as the guys are warming up, I'm just getting colder and colder and colder and colder.
Yeah.
And afterwards, Rich Francis, who was sat at stroke, was like, "I could see your lips turning blue." And someone, I think it was Clive, was like, "Yeah, I could hear your teeth chattering over the microphone." I remember we got onto the start, and I just forgot it all. It was like in the race. And the race was just chaos. I don't think we went below 39.5 the whole time. And it was Danny Marrett was sat at 7, and he just kept going, "Another 10 on the legs." Well, I'd be like, "Okay, 10 on the legs." And then 10 strokes later, "Another 10 on the legs." We just like carried on doing that the whole way down and got to the end, one like amazing moment. And then about 30 seconds later, I became really acutely aware of how cold I was. And I was just like, oh my God. And we got to the landing stage, and the boys were like, "We were going to throw you in, but then we decided that actually you just needed a hot shower." It was just, it was such a weird day. It was incredible.
It's one thing I say to the rowers, like if someone gets a bit pissy with the cogs or something, I'll be like, do you remember at the start of the session when you were really cold? That's the most warm that person has been today.
Yeah.
So give them a break.
Yeah.
Because you get warmer as an athlete and you're fine.
Yeah.
And the cox just gets colder and colder.
And more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when you're on somewhere like the tideway. I used to hate rowing on the tideway in Cox Fours because you'd be lying there and you'd see the wave coming towards you and be like, "That's going to be on me in a second. I'm going to be sitting in a pool of tideway water for the next 45 minutes.
You just got 3 seconds of anticipation.
Yeah, exactly. The anticipation's even worse. So yeah, it's just miserable.
So then moving on to 2009, so under 23s. Obviously that's one we got to talk about because you always have to talk about the wins. How was that in that year in general? Were you sort of confident on your position? Was it difficult?
So I was fairly confident. I think I'd been hanging around the most, and that's often the way it was with Coxes. I think it's changed a lot in the last few years. They're more structured about how they select their Coxes and things, but I think at the time it was kind of a showing face situation.
Yeah, who wants it?
Who wants it? Who's there the most? And it was convenient, I was right down the road and all the rest of it. And so I'd been hanging around. I think we'd done some development cruise. I think we raced in a women's 8. Yeah, we raced in an 8 at Henley, which was a similar sort of crew to the under 23s. So I don't remember there being a huge amount of sort of stiff competition for the seat. We went in. I mean, that's the thing with things like juniors and under 23s. You have no idea when you turn up what your speed's going to be like. At least at the senior level, you kind of have a bit of a clear idea with the World Cups and all this kind of stuff. You don't have a clue. So we turned up and I'm not sure we realized how fast we were.
But you had
that was my I mean, we had some really
turning medalists.
We had some turning medalists. Yeah. We had some sort of up and coming talent. So people like Vicky Thornley, Emily Taylor, who ended up, I think, then going to the Worlds actually later that year as the spare. Michelle Veazey, who was another, big athlete who was kind of seen as someone who was, going to be getting up into the team. But still, you don't know. You don't know what the Americans are going to turn up with, which was most of the issue in the women's 8. A crew like the Romanians. So those are the kind of people who you sort of worry about. And I think the thing is that the women's 8 had always been, the women's 8 often wasn't the top crew, basically. So you didn't really know what you were going to get. And I think coming into under 23s, that's the whole thing as a Cox, I think, as well. Is I'm not saying it was the best Cox in the world, but you could be the best Cox in the world, but your crew could be the bottom crew in the squad. There's nothing you can do about it. But obviously we had the good athletes. I think maybe the top crew was their quads that year. The women's quads was kind of the lead women's crew, but there wasn't, a pair of 4 loads of other boats ahead of us. And so we kind of went in not really knowing. And I think we won the heat fairly comfortably, which took us straight through to the final. But we were pretty aware that the Americans who were in the other heat were going to be the ones that we needed to watch out for. We just really didn't know what their speed was like. and it was a weird regatta because there was this massive storm.
Yeah.
And it delayed, not our race, it delayed the rep. So we weren't in the rep, but it delayed the women's 8 rep because this massive storm rolled in, and it basically picked up an entire rack of boats and just rolled the whole thing. And I think it only stopped because it hit like the German team van or something.
Yeah, it landed on the van.
It landed on the van, yeah. And so loads of boats were like completely total.
It was the Cox for like freestanding rack. You know, you sort of get 2 freestanding rack. So it was literally, I think there was like 8 Cox for on it, and
I think it hit
same storm,
and it definitely hit the Polish, or it was one of the Europeans women's 8 got hit.
Yeah,
I think it was the Romanians or the Poles, one of those crews. And the thing that was incredible about it was it showed how much rowing, even internationally, is like a community, because essentially everyone, all the teams were like, right, how do we make sure everyone can race? So like our men's Cox 4 got completely totaled. And I think the Australians...
so the Australians they turned up with their whole set of boats.
Yeah, that's right.
Summer. So they're like, right, well, we've got our junior Cox 4 and we've got we've got training Cox 4. And then, the Czechs were like, right, let's go and see what we can find. And
then I think the Romanians or the Poles, I think like their boatmen drove through the night back there to pick up a whole load of boats, and then picked up a whole load of boats for other people on the way. So it was all this like, how can we just get everyone on the water in the best equipment possible?
That was awesome. Yeah.
So it was a weird, so we were like, oh, well, we're out of this because it's the rep that's been delayed. We don't have this. So we kind of had that confidence, I think a bit of kind of cockiness about, oh, well, we've not really been affected by this and our boat was fine. And it came to the final. Honestly, I don't remember that much about it. I remember lining up on the start, and obviously we were in one of those middle lanes, and the only thing that I really remember is that the Americans who were in the lane next to us, their Cox, who was the same Cox, I think, who I'd raced at juniors and who had beaten us at juniors. All I can remember that the bow seat was her surname was Roddy. And all I can remember from that race was sitting there. And I think it was a bit of a crosswind. And I could just remember her going, yeah, tap it, Roddy, tap it, Roddy, tap it, Roddy. And I was just like, oh my God, this is doing my head in, as she tried to keep her boat straight. And then the race happened, and I think it was just like, I don't think we did anything spectacular. I think we just rode our race well, essentially, and we had good speed. I don't think we did anything. We didn't have to do anything particularly out of the ordinary. The only other thing I really remember is getting into the last maybe like 300-400 meters and thinking we're gonna win. And I think I said something along the lines of like, we're leading this, we can do this, keep it clean, or something like that. And after the race, all my crew were like, yes, we understood what you were saying, which was don't fuck it up now, because otherwise we're going to win this. And that was it. It was just like, just keep it clean, do what we kind of know how to do. I think the Americans closed on us quite a lot in the last kind of few hundred meters, but we had enough.
You can see it. We talked about this before. It can finish very close, but you really are in control. You can kind of manage that.
And I didn't feel that threatened by it. And you get caught out, right? Like in my Olympic race, we obviously came back from last, but the Romanians nearly pipped us on the line, and I honestly wasn't really paying any attention to them. And it wasn't until like probably the last few strokes I looked over and I thought, oh shit, they are right there. So, you can really get caught out by these things, but I think a lot of the time,
I've watched races back, like when in the Cox for the next year, we had to halfway, we were really like New Zealand was ahead of us, and then like my memory of the race is like, oh yeah, came through the K and I dispatched them, and it was over, it was done, the race was done. And then you watch the whole thing back and it's like they're there the whole time. Dispatched is like half a leg. But it's just, I get you get a sense of the feel of the race, how quickly you came through someone. Like there's many other factors, aren't there, than just looking at like what it is in front of you.
And I think that's what a good Cox can do, right? Because that's how you read the race and how you look at, and you have that's the nice thing about a Cox is you have the pleasure, I guess, to be able to actually look at the faces of the crews around you. And that was certainly our Olympic race. Yeah. Our Olympic race, we went off, we talked all week about needing a faster start, which obviously did not pay off. But, I was still like looking at our speeds. I was like, okay, we're doing all right. And we're with the Americans and we knew they were the crew to beat. So we're like, well, if they're not a million miles ahead of us, it can't be that bad. But the Dutch and the Canadians had gone out, like, just flown out. And I remember looking at them, looking at their faces, looking at their rhythm, and hearing the way that they were talking to each other and hearing the tones of how they were shouting to each other. And I I just looked at them. I was like, well, neither of those is sustainable. Like neither of those, they may be ahead now, but they're not going to be ahead. So I'm not going to worry about them. And the crews I was worried about was the Americans and actually the Kiwis. Like I said, I kind of just forgotten about the Romanians who nearly snuck up on us. But you get that ability to actually not just kind of, all those things that you're talking about, like what speed are we going, what speed are they going, but actually be able to literally look at them and think, well, you can see that rhythm is sustainable. You can see the pain on their faces. You can hear that the way they're talking to each other isn't positive. These guys, they don't think they can do it. So yeah, I think it's one of those extra like coxing skills essentially.
I've always thought it interesting to see or to ask coxes like how much you're listening to what other coxes are doing. I think it's specifically Henley. You can quite often hear it. And funny enough, again, I've talked about this before, but in the Thames Cup here, we sort of bet on the crew listening to us. And we would call a fake 10 before we then call a big 10. They would feel like they held the push really well. Then you put the 10 in. So you be loud on purpose and you can kind of...
Playing the psychological game.
Yeah.
It depends. I think you try to, but often I'm talking so much and so loudly that I don't hear much else. I think the only ones that I really remember is actually the year that we went to Junior Worlds, we went and raced at Nat Champs. And because we were a junior, we weren't officially selected, but we were essentially a Junior Worlds crew, they told us we had to race in senior women's eights, which is fair enough, right? Like there's no point in us racing junior women's eights. So we were racing in senior women's eights. And the crew that we had, we kind of knew with the crew. We're a Thames crew, and Thames at the time was the centre for women's sweep rowing. And essentially, this crew they just won the Remenham at Henley, and they were all the girls who hadn't quite made the squad. So they were essentially a development kind of crew. And obviously, they'd won the Remenham, they'd had an amazing race there. And I think they had then basically been on the piss for the last 2 weeks. So I don't think they were taking Nat Champs super seriously. I think they thought they were going to win this race, basically. And we raced them in the heat. And I remember we were not really pushing them. We were kind of we were in touch, but we weren't really challenging them. And I remember hearing their cox, who was really good. And I heard her say, I think she said something like, oh yeah, Thames, this is our day, Thames. And I was a bit bolshy for a heat, but all right, whatever, okay. And obviously, we had only been together for a couple of weeks, so our learning curve was really steep, and we were picking up the whole time. And we went into the final having kind of changed up how we were thinking, like different plans, the whole lot. And we found ourselves leading this Thames crew. And I remember thinking about that call. I was like, and I made a call that was something basically like, and we were racing as Nautilus, which was the GB. I was like, right, Nautilus, this is it. This is our day. This is our day, Nautilus. And the crew, because we kind of talked about that. And I think, and we beat them. And it was like I say, I don't think they were taking that champ super seriously, but for us, it's that junior crew, we were really set us on the, on the right track. And actually one of the crew from that Thames boat coached me a few years later at Bumble and became a really good friend. And she was just like, oh man, we were so bitter that you beat us. We couldn't believe we'd been beaten by a bunch of schoolgirls, basically. But yeah, it was, that was one of the only times I can really remember. I mean, I'm sure I was listening, but I don't remember any particular times when I used it so much.
I mean, other countries going to be in other languages, so a lot of it's just tone, volume, not specifically like words. Yeah.
Kind of picking up the vibe of it.
Yeah, and plus if you're concentrating too much on what other people are doing, you're going to lose yourself.
You don't know what's going on in your own
more of an afterthought, I think. Yeah. So coming off under 23 Worlds win, then obviously sort of feeling like you've set your place with the Henley win as well. What were you doing outside of rowing? So from that time, it's still.
So I was finishing
at Brook.
So 2009 would have been the end of my undergrad degree, and then I was feeling confident, and I thought, oh well, maybe I can make the Olympic team.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, London Olympics coming up in a few years. So I kind of planned to take the following year to just row and try and make some money, just be able to keep rowing. So I was doing some coaching, and I was working at Leander, which was the worst job I've ever had.
Hey, I used to do that
Oh
job.
my God, I hated it so much. Because waitressing at Leander was just awful. Because I used to go in there, and the days I liked was when I was on crew. So if I'm serving the crew food, I was like, this is great, this is fun, I can do this. It was the days when you're stuck there and there's one table in for dinner and it's a bunch of old white men who are sat there and any of the boys who were doing the same job, because a bunch of us used to do this.
Yeah.
They'd always be like, "Oh, tell me about what rowing you're doing." Obviously, I'm a little girl, so they assume that I have nothing to do with rowing, or I'm just some chick that they picked up from Henley or whatever. I just used to hate it. No one ever used to tip because I don't know, these people don't tip, or it would be, and you never knew what you were getting. So you'd have these shifts. It was like, oh, your shift today is 2 p.m. till close. If there's one table of guys in for dinner, close could mean 8 p.m. Or there could be a wedding and close could mean 3 a.m. after you've tidied up. And it's just, I hated it. It was awful. Hated that job.
Fair enough. I used to hate working in the front of house, but then I used to very quickly switch to the kitchen. And working in the kitchen was great because I had unlimited Leander food supply.
Yes. And I loved being in the kitchen. And actually, Scott Wallace, who was the head chef at the time,
Shout out.
Took me under his wing a bit and used to and he knew I liked to cook and stuff. So he used to show me stuff and he'd save me good food and all that kind of stuff. So I loved being in the kitchen, but the front, it was awful.
Scott's a legend.
Yeah, great guy. So I was doing that. I was doing some coaching. I was doing the rowing. I very quickly realized that there was no way I was going to make the national team. That wasn't going to happen. So I was just kind of like, what do I do next? So I think I knew that I'd wanted to do the boat race. So I spent a lot of the year trying to work out if I could get in, essentially, onto a course the following year. So it was kind of a bit of a pause year in a way. It was like, I can't remember what I coxed at Henley that year. I think it was another ladies' plate 8, but not a very good one.
Oh, yeah, I was in it.
You were in it.
Yeah,
That's right. It was not a very good ladies' plate 8,
2010, yeah. So what happened, it was a bit of...
it was like a thrown together last minute kind of thing, wasn't it?
And then I'd been injured. I'd had a back... I'd been out, literally, my back went in January Bagnolas, and I got back to rowing in summer Bagnolas and dropped in that 8. And we had a great time.
It was fun.
We had such fun. Who
else was in that boat?
Like Padmore.
Yeah,
Robin Dow.
Who
we had, who was,
great.
What a legend. Yeah. Rest in peace.
Webby in that boat?
No, Webby's ankle had gone the year before. We had the German guy, Seb.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now does gymnastics.
Does he?
Yeah.
And we had...
seeing him on Facebook,
is it Charles, what's his name? The big afro.
Oh, yeah. What was it? Charles? Oh, he was sweet. He was a nice guy.
I think maybe John Clay.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
It was a real mix.
Yeah.
And it was a fun camp.
Yeah.
I was just happy to be rowing again because I spent 3 months on the bike. And then, I don't know, did we get done in the first round or something? But
I think so. Yeah.
It was what it was.
It was what it was.
I think we all learned a bit. It was it was definitely a fun camp. For me personally, I just loved the whole thing because
you were back.
I'd spent 4 months on the bike on my own, and it's just horrible. And then back, that first injury was pre-bikes with any monitors.
Oh, so you just didn't know what you were doing.
So you just
that's horrendous.
It's horror. Imagine erging without a screen. Cool. Every day on your own. I was doing a lot of swimming with Vicky Bryant because we both had done our back.
That's right. Yeah.
So every morning, there was only 1 hour that was open sessions. It's 6:30 till 7:30. We'd just be up doing our aqua jogging. We knew all the names of the OAPs. Hi Margaret, how are you doing? How's John? Just being doing a little aqua jogging. She saved me from going mental.
Yeah,
as well.
You need that. You need that when you're injured. You need someone else who's doing the same thing, don't you?
Yeah.
So I think it was that, and then trying to line up the following year, basically, to go to Oxford and do the boat race, basically. And I went in, so I was doing a master's course, and I went in very confident in that Oxford year. I was, the oppo was Jack Carlson, who had coxed the ISIS crew the year before, essentially. So it was him, Sam Winterlevy, who was a junior, he was fresh out of school from St Paul's, another St Paul's boy.
Yeah.
Hannah Ledbetter, who'd done maybe the lightweights. So those were kind of the main competition. And I was like, wow, I've been to, I'm an under 23 world champion. I've won Henley. I've got this in the bag, basically. and I didn't. And it was just, it was a weird year. So I think, I have, in my head, I'd love to go and do it again because I'd do it completely differently, both my boat race years.
Yeah.
I think there were things that, as part of the system, that didn't suit me, didn't help me, didn't favor me, but that's the way these things work, right? You have to be selected for the crew that's in front of you with the coach that's in front of you.
It's a different game, the boat race.
Yeah. And I thought I was going to be in the blue boat until probably January, and then suddenly I was just not being put in the boat anymore, and I was like, oh God, what's happened here? And I remember the day that they told us, and I think from what the guys have said, it was fairly close, and it kind of came down to, who they knew better, who they trusted. And I was, at the time, I was actually living in Henley and commuting to Oxford, so I wasn't going on nights out, I wasn't around, I wasn't going to meals with them, I was kind of quite separate. And I remember them sort of taking us after the outing and saying, they talked to the blue boat guys, and they were in there for a while having a chat. And then they kind of took me aside and said, you're not going to be in the blue boat, you're going to be in ISIS. And I went up into the change room and I think threw some things around and then came back down and was like, okay, fine, I'm going to get on with this. And the guys in that ISIS crew were amazing. We had so much fun. It was another crew where we just got on really well. There was a lot of laughter. And I think the thing that was interesting was that if you'd asked the blue boat, obviously they picked Sam, but I think if you'd asked the ISIS crew, they would have chosen me. So it kind of worked out.
Yeah, that's good.
And I was the right, I think the blue boat guys were quite experienced. Sam, they kind of liked his energy, etc. What the ISIS crew needed, who were less experienced, was someone more experienced, and they needed someone a bit calmer and a bit more sort of level-headed, I guess. And so it fitted, and we had a great time. And I'm really close with some of those guys. Like, obviously, I married one of them, pretty close with him. But like Dave Whiffen, who was in that boat, he got married last weekend, and Alex and I were groomsmen, and I did the best man speech. So we're still really close with these guys, and loads of them were there, which was really nice. And we were a real mix. Tom Watson, who was at Stroke, had done some sort of Canadian lightweight under 23 stuff, I think. Alex, George Blessley, Dan Harvey, they'd done a lot of lightweight boat race stuff, and Alex had done some international stuff as well. And then there were some college guys who hadn't really done much before, and it just really came together. And it was definitely one of those crews that was kind of more than the sum of its parts, I think. We just really had a fun time, and they really kind of picked me up and put me back on my feet, I think, because they really backed me, and they thought I was really good, and that kind of gave me the confidence to kind of do that race well, I think. But we just had some really great experiences, and I think one was when we had done a fixture against, I think it was Scullers, and we were rowing back. The fixtures, was really fun to do, but then you had to row back from Chiswick back to Putney against the tide. It was often very high, so the water at that point was crap, and it would be a Saturday and everyone, then dog would be out, and it was just horrendous. So you have to get back and everyone's knackered and all the rest of it. And we were rowing back and the water was horrendous, and we got past Hammersmith Bridge, so we're kind of coming into the last bit of it, riding over this water and just, oh God, this is awful. And Dan Topolsky was in the launch with Sean, I think. And it was like, oh, let's go over and chat to the ISIS guys. Came over and went, guys, I just think you're rowing really well in this water. I just think you're looking like a really good rough water crew. And we were all like, sorry, what did you just quote True Blue the movie to us? Did you just quote your own quote from the film? And we all fell about laughing, and he clearly didn't realize.
I didn't even get it.
No, we were just like, why are they kissing themselves?
That's why it's in the movie. It's just one of his lines.
So we just had a really good time, and I remember we went out to race, and the Goldie crew were enormous. Our guys, we had a lot of, Tom, George, Dan, Alex were all ex-lightweights. On the whole, our crew were quite small, and the Goldie crew, but they were like 2 stone a man bigger than us. It was a huge difference. And I remember we were going out, we were doing the warm up, which is, so you go the other way and you go down through Fulham, and you're kind of going around there. And it's another one where it's kind of difficult to know what you're facing up against, really. But we were quite confident in what we had, and we were down there, and I think we were easied and kind of sorting ourselves out. And Goldie turned just behind us and rode past us, and I heard one of them be like, "Yeah, Goldie," and then a bunch of their babes like slap the water as they go, and I was like, "Okay, we're going to win this race. Like, we've got this." So we went off the start. It wasn't a particularly interesting race. We just got ahead and stayed ahead, but we beat them by quite a long way. And it was this just, it kind of gave me a lot of my kind of confidence back, I guess.
Yeah.
And I realized at that point that I wanted to have another crack, and so I applied for another master's degree, and came back the following year. And I thought, I know how to do this. I know how to do this now. I need to do things differently, blah, blah, blah. And I got it completely wrong again, I think. I mean, I got the boat the second year, but I wasn't coxing well. In fact, I was coxing worse than I had the previous year, because I was spending all my time focusing on coxing to be selected rather than coxing to make the boat go faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't confident in my abilities at all. I really wasn't confident in my decision making. I mean, that, it was my failings, but I think the setup didn't suit me. I think the coaches, Sean in particular, I think his style was one of those that was like, well, if you're not doing well enough, keep them under pressure, or like keep people under pressure. So I never felt secure in my seat. And actually the best coxing I've ever done is when I am happy that I'm not going to be replaced and I can just focus on making the boat go faster. I don't have to think about selection, which is why I think I did well. Like, I was the best coxing by far I ever did was in 2016, because I knew I was in the boat. And so I was always worried that I was going to lose my seat.
What would you say is the difference then? But like, what were you changing as a cox from being like...
I think I was trying to impress people. So I was spending my time thinking about, what's a cool sounding call I can make? Like, how can I impress people? And I wasn't actually thinking, is what I'm doing making the boat go faster? Am I doing the best job I can do to add boat speed, not just to be picked? And I think, like I say, the sort of lack of confidence was a huge issue, because I really doubted my decision making, and I kind of made a lot of poor decisions because I think I just didn't trust my own mind, essentially. But obviously I was selected, and I remember feeling really unsettled and uneasy about it. And again, we had a big weight deficit, and I remember Sean, after our weigh-in, Sean basically said to us, he was like, right, well, you're either going to overturn the biggest weight deficit in boat race history, or you're going to be children crushed by giants. We're like, thanks, Sean. Another great Sean Bowden quote. But, the weigh-in itself, I remember feeling really, again, just totally lacking confidence. And I think one of the things that sounds really insignificant, but looking back on it, I think was really a powerful factor in that, was the fact that we all got given our all-in-ones to wear to the weigh-in. And and bear in mind, I was tiny at the time. I weighed like 48 kilos. I would wear a women's extra small or maybe small all-in-one. And I was given a men's medium, because they were like, well, that's what we've got. We don't have any women's smalls because we haven't ordered any, because we haven't had a woman coxing our blue boat in, I think it was like well over a decade or something. So I was given this men's medium, and I put it on, and I remember it was hanging down. Like, you could see all of my sports bra underneath. I was like, I can't stand up in front of the media wearing this. Like, I can't, like, this is just awful. And Barbara, who was the administrator, was like, I don't there's nothing we can do. And bless him, like my ex, Andrew, he was a very handy guy. And he was like, I reckon I can take it up. So he like took it up, sewed it, like unpicked it, sewed the shoulders up and sewed the sides like together to make it at least not hang off me. But you can see, like, looking back on the photos, you can see that like the exchanging logo is like stretched right around my body, because he's like picked the whole thing round. But I remember that feeling of just feeling so uncomfortable and thinking like, I don't really belong here. And at the time, Hackett were the kit sponsor, and they make men's clothes. So they were like, well, we can't give you a pair of chinos to match the crew because we don't make women's clothes. So you just have to find something that looks roughly the same. So I was like, had to go to the shops and pick something out. And they gave me the Hackett jumper, which again was like a men's small, which was like drowning me. I just remember standing there feeling so uncomfortable and so like, I didn't belong here and shouldn't be here.
That's such bullshit from the organisers.
Well, this is the thing. And now obviously things are different because now they've got the women as well. So I think you wouldn't get this, the same thing. But this was when it was just a men's cruise on the Tideway. And I just remember thinking like this, I feel like I don't belong.
There's a very old school attitude of like, there's eight people in this boat. Like, there's eight. It's all about the eight. No, it's 9.
Well, yeah.
It's 9.
And actually, if there's going to be a 9th, it's going to be a guy. It's going to be a man.
Yeah.
So, okay, the men's Coxers all had clothes that fit them, but I didn't, basically. And I just, And, this is none of this is an excuse for what happened on the race, but I just feel like I was set up, I had set myself up so badly for that race day. And on the day, I was standing on the balcony at Westminster and Dan Polsky came over to me and started just like unloading on me, just like, oh, remember to do this, remember to do that, think about this, think about that. And I was like, this guy does not trust me. And again, I just went into that race just so unsettled and so, just lacking in confidence, I think. And the race, I mean, again, I blanked out a lot of that race in my memory, but the bits I remember is I remember that I remember coming out of Hammersmith Bridge, basically, and coming towards the A-it, and essentially Cambridge having used up almost all of their advantage, and we were dead level with them. And the last call I made before the race stopped was, I remember saying to the guys, we're dead level, they've used up their advantage, we're going to win this race. And then, like, all hell breaks loose, basically.
Yeah. So this is 2012, and this is the year that Trenton, I'm not even going to say his whole name, that guy, he cost me a lot of money.
He cost a lot of people a lot of money.
Jumped in for some bullshit cause, no one even remembers why, and stopped the whole race. So literally at about halfway, the point at which you were going to take it.
I think so. Cambridge will tell you opposite, but we think so.
Okay, so the reason why I lost a lot of money that year was the first time the Leander crew raced both Cambridge and Oxford. And we beat Cambridge in one of our pieces, and you backdoored us. Yeah. Like, you were gone. So then I was like, well, I'm putting some money on this.
Yes. The odds were against us because we were so much lighter than them. Yeah. So the odds were good.
So obviously, like, that's just absolute like, expect the unexpected, but that is not ever been part of the plan.
No, exactly. And I remember because there'd been a lot of rain, so there was a lot of debris in the water, and we talked a lot about, what happens if something comes down? The umpires might have to steer us around it. Well, the race will keep going as much as possible, blah, blah, blah. And I remember seeing, and we'd hit a fridge like 2 or 3 days before.
Okay.
That was floating underwater, so I hadn't seen it.
Yeah.
And then the fin like right up because you just rode right over the top of it. So there was all sorts of stuff in the river.
Who puts a fridge in a river?
It's the Tideway.
In the week and a half before, we saw a fridge, a fully upholstered sofa, and an oil painting floating down the river. It was just so weird. It was bizarre. I saw something and I thought, piece of crap in the river. Kind of expected that. And then I saw that it was moving across the stream, not with the stream. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense. And I thought, it's a duck. You kind of, you fill in the blanks with what you expect to see, right? So I expected debris. It wasn't that. So it's something alive. It must be a bird of some description. And then I saw that it was a person. And I was like, some drunk guys falling in the river. And then I realized it was rowing into the path. It was moving into the path. And it wasn't until quite late on that I realized that on our trajectory, we were going to smash this guy in the head and probably kill him if we hit him.
Yeah.
So I obviously stopped the boat, and we talked about what happens if you have to stop, because there have been races where they have had to stop for one reason or another. What's usually happened is essentially they've restarted the race as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So we were like, right, we're stopped. Okay, get ready. Like, they're going to restart us as soon as we're past whatever this is.
Yeah.
And it never happened. We were like, okay, this is weird. What's happening now? And they stopped us. They turned us around.
Well, because then you're in full stream and you're flying.
Yeah, exactly. So they're like, we're going to go back. Yeah. And then the whole flotilla comes past.
Oh,
the massive waves. We're like in this wildly rocky water. Lactate building up for the guys. Like, we were stationary, I think, for 20 minutes. Yeah. It was quite a long time. Really messed with the BBC's TV schedule as well. They weren't happy. Well, they were happy because it was great watching. In fact, they weren't going to renew the contract for the boat race until that happened. And then they did, because they were like, well, that was fun.
Huh.
So they turn us round, we row back up, and they kind of got us eventually kind of straight and level again. And I think they started just basically level, which was, to my recollection, was pretty much where we were.
Yeah.
But we were very close together. It started us very close together. And I just had no control over the boat because the water was still because all the flotilla had gone past, turned around, come back, and I just felt like I couldn't control where the boat was going. And we started on a straight, but we were quite quickly coming into a bend. We started off, we had a decent start. They had a decent start. I think we were maybe just edging, but not, we were kind of pretty much level. And I steered into the bend, got warned, and the Cambridge Cox, Ed Bosson, he knew exactly what to do. As soon as I got warned steering into the bend, he steered out towards me. He made, his coxing was impeccable, basically. And my 6-man's blade basically caught, they had a bucket rig on bow side, and my 6-man, his blade hit one of the blades, hit both of the blades, got caught between. I'm not really sure what happened, but all I remember is hearing the clash, which is fairly common in the boat race, and we'd practice for that, and then suddenly seeing half his blade floating down the river. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not how these clashes usually, I'd never really seen a blade break like that before. I've seen blades break when you row into Temple Island, for example, but I'd never seen one break in that kind of. And I remember putting my hand up and turning around to look at the umpire and thinking is there something that can be done here? And my brain maybe spilled it in, but I remember watching him shake his head, look at me and shake his head, basically. And then it's right, well, now we have to finish this race with 7 guys. The guy whose blade's broken is the biggest guy in the boat, probably our best athlete, Hanno, who's he'd done sort of German international stuff. And then it was right, well, how do we get to the finish line? It's the last third of the race, pretty much. And I remember him, I was obviously still coxing, but I remember him shouting and just he's probably the best cox I've ever heard. He was just shouting at our crew, you got the stuff he was saying was just really emotive stuff, about they were heroes for doing this. It was unbelievable. And he's trying to move up and down with the time of the boat just to not disrupt things too much. And we only lost by something I think it was a few lengths, which, given that we only had 7 guys, we took a lot of pride in that. Across the finish line, and I'm kind of protesting, kind of knowing that this was a done deal. It wasn't going to make any difference. And we're sort of, floating through the bridge. And suddenly I hear Will, who sat at 2, I hear him kind of shouting. And I'm well, kind of ignoring it, trying to talk to the umpire, shouting. And he kind of keeps going and kind of peering around. Obviously, it's difficult to see what's going on in the bow seat. And I see him turned around. And, well, what is he doing? And he's shouting. And then Roll, who sat at stroke, who was a doctor, he was qualified, starts trying to climb over people to get towards the bows. And I'm really confused about what's going on. And we realized that Alex had collapsed and he was just completely out of it.
Yeah.
And the one memory I really remember is that moment thinking very clearly about Scott Rennie. I don't know if you knew Scott.
I rode with him once, yeah.
So I rode with him at that World University Champs in 2008 in the 8. He was an athlete at Molesey, and he was a real up and comer. I think there's a very good chance that he would have. He was pushing for the Olympic team in 2012. Just the sweetest guy you've ever met. Such a nice guy, incredible athlete, great friend. And he had, a couple of years before, been warming up on the ergo for a weight session and had just keeled over. And he, turns out, had an undiagnosed heart condition, and they couldn't bring him back, and he died. And I just remember thinking of him, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I can't see what's happening back there. And they eventually got Alex out of the boat, and he wasn't in a good way, but he was fine. But it was just this. The whole day was just this heart-wrenching. It was just such an awful, horrible feeling. And I remember going to the dinner that night and not wanting to go. Already receiving emails, abusive emails, because I had some club position that year, treasurer or something, some student position.
Online,
so yeah. I think, and I had an email address that just dumped into my personal account, And I didn't realize people cared that much about, but like emails from random people, emails from alumni. Like I remember receiving one email from a OUBC alumni, basically, you know, some old guy like telling me that I'd, you know, ruined this race and, you know, I made these, and like,
that's not helpful.
no, exactly. And I went to the dinner, and one of the first people I saw was Asa Nethercote, and he had coxed, I think it was his 2004 boat race. One of his boat races, he had made in his mind, he'd made a bad decision about the steering. I think someone had maybe clashed and caught a crab or something, and he felt responsible for losing the race. And then he'd gone on to get into the Olympic team, won a silver medal at Beijing. And I remember he came up to me, he gave me a massive hug, and I didn't know Asa well. I'd met him, but I didn't know him well. He gave me a massive hug, and he said, listen, my girlfriend from the time of when I was at the boat race called me today. I haven't heard from her in ages. And she said, you need to go and find her, and you need to tell her that you know how it feels and it's going to be okay.
Oh.
And he was already sick. Like, we all knew that he wasn't, you know, he didn't have much time left. And at the time, I was kind of a nice, comforting thing, and I didn't really think that much about it. But at the end of the year, when I was thinking, like, do I even ever want to get in a boat again? I remembered it. And I was like, right, he did it. And he went and won a silver medal at the Olympics. Like, you know, if he did it, I can do it.
Yeah.
And the only thing that really got me back in the boat was him and that crew. My crew from, like, I remember sitting down with them afterwards and thinking, they're obviously going to blame me for this. And Alex was brutal with me, and he was like really brutal about some of my coxing, about some of my learning. But he was like, but you're a good cox. Like, if you want to, you can use this experience. And the guys, I remember like Kevin Baum, who was in the 3-seat, I remember he said, I've watched the race and I was rowing so badly in the first half. If I'd been rowing better, we would have been further ahead. You could have steered wherever you liked. Like, so I take responsibility. And it was this mentality of we win as a team, we lose as a team.
Yeah.
And it didn't come from the coaches, I would say, or didn't come from one of the coaches, certainly, that attitude. You know, I felt quite isolated in a lot of ways. But that crew, like, they gave me the confidence to start to go back again. And so I kind of had spent a lot of time thinking, do I ever want to get back in a boat? But there was a Europeans, there was a women's 8, a development crew for the Europeans that year. And I thought, okay, let's give it a go. And it was people I knew and people I'd rowed with a lot, and, you know, it felt slightly more kind of a comfort thing. And we went and we had a really great race, and I'd done a development crew for the Europeans for a few years. And I think we'd come 6th one year, we'd come 4th one year, and we went out to Varese, and it was one of those races where, because there's a lot of races as a cox where I don't think ultimately my coxing has made a difference to the outcome. There's a few, and in my whole career, I'm saying there's a few where I can pick out that say, if I hadn't been in that boat, we wouldn't have had the finish we had. And that was one of those races, because we went out, I think our heat or rep or whatever, we were looking at a sort of 4th place finish, essentially coming into the race, 4th or 5th. And we said, okay, look, if things aren't going well, we're just going to go for home with like 750 to go or a K to go or something. We were like, we'll be ballsy. We'll just go for it. And I remember getting to 500 gone, and I was like, we're going to get dumped out the back door. And I was like, okay, guys, I know we're not expecting this, but we're going to go for home.
It's now.
And they were like, okay. And we held on and got a bronze medal. And again, I kind of felt like that call, obviously, if we hadn't have got a bronze medal, I probably would have been like vilified for, but because it worked, you know, it just gave me such confidence. And that was then the feeder into kind of getting invited to trial for the senior team the following year.
I find it's really hard with the cox. It's you know, the crew wins it and the cox loses it, and it's this. I see this mentality in football. You know, the team always wins. Cristiano wins, but the manager is responsible for the loss.
The goalkeeper often is the one who loses it.
A good example. Which is really hard. Interesting, like what you've spoken about. What my question about that boat racing was going to be, it's really hard for a cox to take like ownership and like that's one thing that's difficult with each cox novices. It's like at a certain point, even if you're not 100% sure, you have to just commit to your decision. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. And So obviously, like from the, watching the footage, it looked like the move you made was really, really aggressive. But like what you said, it was actually Cambridge being quite clever in making that look like more of an aggressive move.
And I think also I just couldn't get out of it.
Yeah.
I think that was the problem. I didn't have whether it was because of how crap the water was or because of my own ability or a combo, I couldn't get us out of the mess that put us in, basically.
Also, it's so easy in hindsight to sit there and be like, oh God, like, well, what, like the broke, why would you clash or the blade's broken? It's like, no, there's just like a million clashes. Like we clash all the time. We practice clashes. Like the likelihood of that happening is awful. So like ridiculous that you would even be considering like, oh, I can't do this because the blade might break. Like you just don't do that. So what I thought I was going to ask you is like, when you've made a decision like that and it's gone wrong, how do you get your confidence back? But actually having listened to what you said about it, it sounds like quite a lot of it was not being allowed to have the confidence in the first place to then make decisions that you weren't happy with.
I mean, the same thing might have happened. Even if I'd been more confident in my decision making, the same thing could have happened. Same outcome could have happened. But I think it meant that I really doubted myself afterwards, so that I was on a shaky foundation. So after I was like, well, I fucked this up. Like this was my responsibility, and that was my loss. So I think the difficulty was finding the confidence again, and it took me years. To get comfortable again, really trusting myself. And partly it was just putting it behind me and like having better experiences, essentially, and making better decisions, or making bad decisions, but kind of then working through why they happened and knowing that I'd do it differently next time.
Yeah, I think also like the problem with the boat race is that you only get one chance to like do it over unless you choose to come back the next year, versus if you have bad World Cup 1 or 2, you've still got the Europeans or Lucerne and Henley to get it right before the World Champs.
Exactly, and you've got opportunities to try things, and if they go wrong, you can justify them. You can change them. So I think a lot of it was just about time and being able to do things differently and having a bit of flexibility. And certainly by the time I got to Rio, because like I say, I felt confident in the seat, I was coxing really well, and I felt like I had the support of the athletes to try things. And even if they were bad or I made a call that was nonsensical or whatever, it didn't matter, and I could just learn from it. It was such a powerful experience.
Oh, absolutely.
And I didn't have that the whole way through. Like there was one year when Morgan was trialing against me and I was not coxing well. Because I reverted back to that coxing to impress rather than coxing to make the boat go faster. And it wasn't until really that final year. And I'd learned so much at Oxford, that was the thing, but I couldn't put it into practice until I was more confident. And in that last year in 2016, it just felt like things just fell into place.
Yeah, because I think like for every cox listening will have made a bad call and will have struggled with it and will have struggled to come back. But like that confidence is so important. And then again, for coaches listening, people in charge of programs, like whatever level it is, like I think that's important to hear that, you're not going to get the best out of your athletes when you're constantly testing them against each other. And it's something we've heard before. Jack was very vocal about it. And like the whole year he felt like his seat wasn't set. And same as you're then rowing to win your seat. You're not actually rowing to get better. So I think it's really like impressive. Like that's the point of having people like you come on. Like yours was, because it's the boat race, it's quite a public one. A lot of people know about it, but like everyone's done it. Everyone,
at all levels.
And you cannot. And if you've never made a mistake, you're never going to get anywhere.
No, exactly.
Either. Yeah.
And I think it allowed me to I stepped away from coxing to sound cool, like saying calls that sounded cool, to just being myself and just letting my own bits come through. And I think I'm jumping again, but the Europeans 2016, which is my favorite race of all times, I coxed. I just was myself, and it was our first race in our possible Olympic lineup, which ended up being our Olympic lineup.
Nice.
Really excited about it. We had Fran Horton, who'd just come in, who's obviously like she'd won. She'd been to 4 Olympic Games, already had Olympic medals. Like, we have her. Mel Wilson had now come into the sweep team. Like, we had this crew that was some people who'd done this before, knew what they were doing. Katie Greaves, Jess Eddy, people like that. And we had fresh people, Zoe Lee, OCB, Karen, who just come in.
Was Polly in there?
Polly as well. And so we had this great mix of personalities, and we were already really enjoying it. We went out to Brandenburg, which is where I'd done my junior world. So it was where I'd done my first ever international race, and I hadn't been back since. And did our heat, which we won. Again, like, fine. I don't think it was a particularly spectacular race, but we ticked the box to go through to the final. And then in the final, the weather was horrendous. I've never done a 2K in conditions that bad, undoubtedly. And we went up there, and I remember, in fact, I can't remember what we were messaging about this morning, but we have a WhatsApp group from that 8. And Fran was making fun of me this morning and was saying something about stupid things I'd said. And one of them was, and what about that time at Europeans when you said you had absolutely no control over where you were steering? And I didn't, because the conditions were so bad and just like all over the place on the way up to the start.
So that was just today. You guys are still chatting.
Yeah,
oh, that's awesome.
We got up to the start. We were in one of the middle lanes because we'd won our heat, and we had the Dutch next to us. And I watched the footage back, and Martin Cross, who was commentating for the World Rowing, said at the start, there's no way, I don't see any way in which the Dutch or the Brits can win this race from one of those middle lanes because the conditions are too bad.
Yeah.
We went off the start, and we just went off. I mean, we went off at like 31, 32. And everyone just flew off, and we were just like trundled off the start. I think at the time we were messing around with trying some sort of full slide starts to try and kind of build into our rhythm better. It wasn't what we were going to do long term. It was kind of part of the learning, I guess. So we kind of trundled off the start, got into a decent race pace, really low rate. And I remember there was bits in that race where I was laughing because the conditions were so bad. But you look back at the footage and we're miles behind, but we look really relaxed. Shoulders are loose, like legs are going together. People, given how bad the water is, the crew just looks comfortable. And we kind of start going through and we start kind of chugging back through people, getting it. But the Dutch was still quite a long way ahead coming into the last maybe 500. But we were like really catching. And obviously at that point, the water flattened down. And because we'd been taking it so easy in the first part, then our beans were kind of, we kind of had a bit more of a full tank, and we start moving through them. And I appreciate that the line's coming up really fast, but we were really shifting. And I looked at the Dutch and I just said to the crew, I wish you could see what I could see. I wish you could see how fast we're catching them. And that's not a cool call. Like, you're never going to sit down and write, oh yeah, this is a really impressive thing to say that people are going to remember for all time. But the crew just jumped. And afterwards they were like, we could just hear how excited you were. And we could hear in your voice, like, how genuine this was. And how this, this had just come out of you. And we rode right through them, and we just got them on the line by not much. Like, we literally got them in the last few strokes. And it set up a whole campaign, and it was just such a good race. And that was one of those races that I think, maybe if it hadn't have been me, if I panicked about how low our rate was, if I panicked about how far behind we were, if I hadn't kind of given them that impetus to keep going, maybe we wouldn't have won it. And it was just, I wasn't thinking about sounding cool. I was just thinking, like, this is literally what I'm seeing, and I just want you to know how good this is. And it was just such a fun race. I love, like, it's my favorite race to watch back because the conditions are just it's just chaos, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah,
when the conditions get really bad, like you can't work.
No,
and you can't
exactly.
Like you've done a job there of letting the crew, like, well, then we'll just stay loose and do what we can.
Yeah.
And everyone else is
like going for it. Like, well, yeah.
It's interesting what you say about sort of almost, pardon the pun, finding your own voice or doing it, just doing it your way. It's another thing, like, again, like trying to bring on novice coxes. They don't have any reference points, so we'll start with some recordings of some good coxes. And it's, but I'm not aggressive like that. I don't talk like that. I'm like, no, I don't want you to talk like that. Here's an example of how someone does it. But, like, you got to do it your way.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because we've got a project coming up in the next few weeks, which I'm not going to talk too much about because I'm not quite sure of our timelines yet. But yeah, I've been talking with some amazing coxes, and we had this exact conversation about finding your voice. And it's really interesting because the group of us that are talking all have very different styles. I think one of the things that my Rio Crew liked about me was I always sounded pretty calm. I was quite concise. I was quite clear with my calls. There was rarely any big drama. You know, a lot of it was just about, I just wanted to make sure they're confident in doing what they knew how to do well and what I knew they did well. And I think, you know, and people have different styles which all work for them. And we were saying that one of the issues we find that seems to affect female coxes, I think, more than male coxes, is struggling to find that voice that is authentic to you.
Yeah.
And I listen to a lot of coxes recordings. You know, I work with a lot of young coxes. And one thing that I hear is a lot of parroting of things that they've clearly heard on recordings. And like when Rory Copus released his recordings, Rory's an amazing cox. Like, he's brilliant. He's a great coach. You know, he knows so much about the sport and about how, you know, all aspects of the sport. And he released some incredible recordings. And then I would listen to like juniors, and they were literally parroting his phrases in his tone of voice. And it doesn't make sense for what they're trying to do. And I remember in my ISIS crew, we were looking back at old race plans, old ISIS race plans, to try and just get some inspiration to build our own. And one of the crews a few years before had some call about they were badass motherfuckers. I was like, well, I can't say that because I'll sound like an idiot if I try and say that. It's not going to work for me. And I think the cox that year had been an American guy, and, you know, that made sense for him. So, you know, you can't just parrot back what you hear. And I think there's some really, really excellent recordings out there of male coxes, you know, the Harry Brightmores, Scott, you know, Rory, people like that. And I think, you know, I hear a lot then of repetition of that. And it's not authentic to the people saying it. And like I say, I think the women struggle more because it is more, it's more men doing it, and that's what they hear, and it doesn't fit them in the same way. And so I think there are coxes who are struggling to find that, and they hear something like, well, this is a good cox, so I should repeat it. And it's not about just repeating it. It's about thinking, why did he make that call? Why did she say that?
I love that.
Why does it fit into her race plan? Why did he think that was the thing to say at the time? How can I take some of that energy, but not necessarily sometimes the words, but make it authentic to me? And, you know, so this is something that there's a group of us that really want to change and just give people, and I do think it is more women to some extent, but give all of his coxes and coaches as well, because I think a lot of the stuff that applies to coxes does apply to coaches as well. Just give them the confidence to be authentic in what they say, and have, you know, some just confidence to kind of have their own personality and let that work.
When I first started coaching, I rode it in high level. I have absolutely no problem coaching at college level. And then I was, but I also have to teach a new cox. I've never coxed. Geez, this is new. This was a new challenge.
Yes.
And worked really hard, and then try and find some of those recordings. And then I did the senior men's team for Wales this year at home country. So we went out to Ireland, which was good fun. And Morgan did the women's team. So we combined that. We had 8 recordings of coxes that we decided together. And I'm just listening to the cox. And I'm like, this is Morgan. You've been listening to Morgan. There's I know she's coxed me, but I've heard some of her recordings with her as well. And then someone else would be like, you 2009 Harry Brightmore. Exactly. It's like you can just see it coming there. And another one, we listened to another one from Henley not long ago, and it was just, it just wasn't coming from within. It was not necessarily bad calls. I mean, the aggression was down. We sort of commented maybe they'd been told not to take the aggression down or whatever, but it just didn't feel like it was.
It wasn't necessarily bad coxing. It was just weird. It was just something so strange.
It's almost like personality-less. It's just like a
preset plan.
Script.
Just reading the race plan.
And you learn so much from other coxes. That's the thing. But it's about trying to fit it. And, you know, one of the coxes I learned the most from was Katie Apfelbaum, who was the ISIS cox in my Blue Boat year in 2012, and who's one of my closest friends now. But we decided that year, we didn't know each other at the beginning of the year. She'd come over from the US, and we became friends so I used to drive my car to Wallingford, because I would then drive home to Henley. I didn't go in the minibus. And one day she was like, oh, can I come in the car with you? And I was like, she wants to be my friend. And I straight from when I met her, I was like, I really like this girl. I was like, oh, she wants to be my friend. She wants to come in the car with me. I found out later the actual reason why was because the minibus made her feel sick, and she thought she would be less car sick in the car with me. But it did. We became really good friends, and we used to sit there on the bus journeys and on the car journeys, and we decided we were going to cox the two boats. So we decided early on in the season it was going to be us, and we were going to work together so that it was going to be us. And it was, and we had very different styles, and we talked about everything. We talked about the calls that we'd made in the sessions that had worked. We talked about different athletes and how they responded to things. We talked about, different exercises to use. We shared everything, and it was so powerful because we both got so much better. And there's so much secrecy, I think, around coxing. Like, there's a lot of like, oh, well, I don't want this person to hear my recordings, and I don't want this person to, know all the drills that I do and stuff. But when you find coxes that work together, it's really, you can see how powerful it is and how much everyone can learn. And I think that's another thing that I've tried to do when I've worked with teams of coxes, is I've said, okay, well, let's all bring a minute of recording and we'll listen to them together. And people are so nervous about it. But you're not going to learn, you're not going to steal everyone's like great calls from 1 minute of coxing, like even if that's what you're worried about. And I'll bring my own 1 minute of coxing, which are often really boring. But that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is like sometimes the good coxing sounds really boring. And I'll force them to sit there and listen to each other's and give feedback and take feedback and say what they think they did well and what they think they could do better, and all that kind of stuff. And it's always a really good learning experience, but convincing people to do it is so hard.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. And also, like, coxes potentially sometimes don't want to share recordings because it gives away your race plan to the opposition. Like, that's one of the reasons why Morgan says on the released one Cox recording and very, very recently, but she didn't used to share them.
Yeah.
But I'm glad she did, because it's like another example of like what people can learn from. Yeah. Have you released any Cox recordings?
No. And partly it's because a lot of my recordings are really bad quality. And I just don't like, as in the sound quality is bad. And partly it's just because of that reason, like I don't want to release race plans, that kind of thing. Having said that, I think I should. And I think a good one, for example, we did a sort of reunion race for some of the Rio crew at the Women's Head last year. And I think that would be a good one to release, because ultimately there's no real pressure on that in terms of the race plan, for example.
So you don't have any like historical races that you could like release?
I have some, but again, the quality is just really poor. So I don't know how much people would get out of them. The thing that I kicked myself about the entire time is that I swear I recorded my Olympic heat, and I didn't do the final because I didn't want to have any pressure on myself, and I didn't want to have an extra thing to worry about, because at that time I was using a standalone dictaphone, basically. But I swear I recorded the heat, and I can't find the recording. It's just disappeared into the ether, basically. So I actually just don't have many good recordings. And I think partly it's a technology thing, like just after I finished was when everyone switched to the Coxorgs, and
they're much better.
And the quality's really good, and they're all, all your recordings are just there. Like I was having to make a conscious decision to record stuff. So I just don't have that much good stuff. But I do think I should release that Women's Head one, because I think that's my most recent one. The quality's good, like good enough to hear what's going on, and it wouldn't be giving away anyone's, because I think Morgan, for example, would have loved to release the recording from her when she coxed the para 4 at the World.
Oh yeah.
But she feels like she can't, because she would be releasing their race plan, which is not, like she can't. So that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, because I personally have never been coxed by you, but it would just be interesting to like hear your style, and
it's good.
Yeah.
I think I should. I mean, I should, and I will. I think I just need to find a platform.
It's when I messaged you to come and do this, I said, we can talk about whatever. I knew you were doing sort of tack. So if you want to like promote yourself, it's absolutely fine. And then I didn't hear back from you. And then I saw that post that Morgan put about all you talking. I thought, oh my God, does she think that I know like the badly tight? Like, is she like, who's told Tom?
It's actually because I've got a 5-week-old baby, and I like my brain is somewhere else.
I just like, oh God, like, no, I didn't know. Yeah, timing. But I mean, I think it's still early to talk about. But cool to see you guys.
Yeah, I think it's just, just trying to support. And I also do this Chattercox thing, which is me and Katie, and that is about providing that actionable feedback that I talked about earlier. And, essentially people can sign up and have recordings listened to, or I can work with them in a more sort of like mentorship kind of way, or do club visits, or so I do all sorts of bits and bobs with that, about kind of providing more of a, and that's something I also do to kind of make a pocket money, essentially.
Yeah.
Junior doctors don't get paid that well, as you may have heard in the news. So my £16 an hour that I get doing my actual job could do with some supplementation.
Mine is whatever the parking is. As well.
And the my parking, my exam fees, my GMC fees, the petrol,
Having spent some time talking about course with Morgan as well, I think it's really interesting what she's talking about, sort of bringing coxing into the future, or certainly the way that coaches deal with them, select them. I think that's going to be really interesting. Watch that space with you guys, I'm
Hopefully.
sure.
Yeah.
So we've kind of got up to it, but in terms of, like you said, you talked about 2016 Europeans getting that win, the run up then from the Olympics from then. How was that? That was just an easy ride, or
It was and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Our crew worked great together. Like I said, we worked hard on that. Like we worked really hard on communication, how we talked to each other, how we responded, that kind of thing. But we also, we worked really hard at that, like the communication and stuff. And we worked a lot about how we were going to do things and how we were going to function. And our big thing was we talked a lot about trust and belief. And we talked about trusting and believing in each other, in what we did well, in how we trained, in everyone's bits that they did, their skills and things. And it just worked. But it was hard. Like we did have some difficult times. We did a lot where we had to really kind of, like I say, trust in what we needed. We did this. I didn't do it. I sat on the bank. They did some absolutely savage seat racing in between the second and third World Cups.
Yeah.
Essentially where Catherine Granger and Vicky Thornley were thrown into the mix. And then we had to go straight to the third World Cup, and they were emotionally, physically just absolutely exhausted. And we ended up being beaten by the Kiwis. And I remember there are pictures from us on the podium, and everyone just looks delirious because everyone was just like, we didn't really care how we'd done. We were just happy that we were there and the crew was set and we were settled. So there were some really difficult bits.
Sea racing is always brutal.
Yeah. And I think, Karen Bennett, for example, like she was sea raced against Catherine Granger. And it was the first, she'd been in the senior team the year before in a non-Olympic boat. So it was her first ever selection into an Olympic boat class, and it was Olympic year.
Yeah.
And she was being sea raced against Catherine Granger.
Yeah.
And she won her seat race. And you just think like, it messed us up, that seat racing, but it also gave us so much, again, belief. You're like, if she can do that, we can do this, essentially.
I've spoken to Karen as well. Last time I was at Caversham, I want to get her on for a bunch of different reasons.
Yeah.
And that'd be awesome to talk about. Yeah. How do you go out and perform under that
Kind of pressure?
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, and Catherine's just an amazing woman, an amazing athlete. But we used that. We used all that stuff to our advantage. We're like, now we've got Karen Bennett in the 7 seat. She is a giant slayer. She is here because she beat the Catherine Granger in a seat race. And that gave us so much confidence and, like I said, belief in each other.
Yeah.
So I think, a lot of that was really, it was difficult, but it really...
It bonded us together,
Yeah, I can imagine. Like, not every day you get to put your fouls in front of DKG.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
I wouldn't stop using that called the Giant Slayer. How to get bored of you?
Yeah, but it was just. I think, so it was difficult, but we worked really hard. That gave us confidence. That gave us something to sort of hang our hats on. Everything does when you're building up, right? Like
talked about
the races you've done, the World Cup races, the pieces in training. Like we had one piece where we'd done a 1500 and we'd essentially been on underneath world record pace. And we always talk about it like, man, if we kept going, maybe we would have broken the world record kind of thing. And, so stuff like that you always...
Just grab hold of anything.
Exactly, yeah.
The funny example we gave with Emma was if you, in the 8 especially, if you win your heat, you will go straight through to the final. So you will be like, oh, we only had to race once.
Exactly.
We've got the benefit.
Yeah.
But then every crew that goes to the rep will say, we've had an extra race. We've
got to use that to prepare.
So it doesn't matter what it is. You just got to grip it and grab hold of it.
You've got to find what works for you, don't you?
Yeah.
So I think, it was a coming together of the right people at the right time. It was people towards the end of their careers who had a huge amount of experience. It was people at the beginning of their careers, or people who were fresh, who, people like myself and OCB kind of, we knew we were only probably going to do one. I definitely knew that I was only going to do one cycle. So it was like, it just fit. And we kind of talk, we joke about how, the girls make fun of me all the time, but, when they're being nice about me, they'll say that the thing I did well was that I kind of knew how to work with them from the psychological perspective and the communication stuff. But we worked really hard at that. Like we did personality testing where we looked at different personality types. What it was about how you communicate with different personality types. So it didn't just happen. It was something that we really built and we really, made work essentially. But it was just it was hard, but it was easy. It fitted and it was amazing. It's just, really. You
do the hard work, and it keeps stepping on. So you see the progress. It's hard work, but you see the progress.
So you kind of got to the last World Cup happy that you were all selected. Then I imagine the pre-Olympic camp, having been beaten by the Kiwis, was a lot of hard work. Because I guess, did you go into those Olympic Games thinking that you were going to medal? Or what was your aim?
We knew that we should medal. And we had these we talked about gold medal goals, silver medal goals, and bronze medal goals, which I also talk about in life. I mean, ultimately, if you medal at most Olympics, you could probably have won a gold. I think the Americans were always the cream to beat, right? I think realistically, we knew that the silver medal was probably, where we were at, but you never rule out winning, right?
Yeah.
But we knew that we had to get it right. And we talked a lot about making our start faster because we knew our finish was good. Which never seemed to really make any difference no matter what we did. So it was a lot of it was just trying to fit those pieces together at the end so that we kind of could show off what we trained for. And just let what we'd done, how we prepared kind of all slot into place at the right time, which is it did. And that was that was kind of how the final played out. We'd spent the whole week since the heat working on making our start better, which made no difference whatsoever. And we knew we didn't want to rely on a fast finish. We wanted to set a race pace, a middle race pace that was, difficult to stay with.
And yet that was a pretty fast finish.
It was a pretty fast finish. I think partly it was fast finish and partly, like I said earlier, it was about not being distracted by what other people were doing. So it was about knowing that the speed we were rowing, even though we were sixth, was good. And I don't think there was any point in that race where I was like, fuck it, we're sick, something's gone wrong. A lot of what I was saying was just, we're doing the right thing. What we're doing is the right thing. We're rowing well, our speeds are good, we're where we need to be.
Yeah.
Don't panic. Just keep doing what you're doing, basically. And then obviously we just dropped the hammer at 750 and that was pretty much it.
Confidence in yourself and your crew. And I guess especially now when you've got speeds in the boat, most crews have got access, certainly on race day, to a GPS coach. It's so difficult at times. I guess also knowing that in Olympic finals people do crazy things.
And that's it. It's not being distracted by that. And that's true, I think, in qualification year. People do even crazier things in qualification year when there are Olympic spots on the line. And so it's kind of having those experiences and knowing how to keep your own head and not change what you're doing.
When all about you are losing theirs.
Exactly.
So presumably then you guys sort of felt like you were must have been happy with the result. That was the result you wanted.
That's the result we wanted, and I think that was the result we deserved, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's a tough phrase. Alex Partridge said you don't deserve anything because just because he deserves something doesn't mean you're going to get it. Yes.
It's in terms of afterwards, you can say based on what we did, it's what we deserve. As an outcome. Not getting ahead of yourself before that point. And then you sort of knew that was it for you. You had other things to do. You wanted to be a doctor.
I had a place at medical school to start about a month after the Olympics, which retrospectively was an extremely bad idea because I wasn't ready. I needed a break. And I ended up failing my first year of medical school and having to resit it, which I think partly was because I wasn't ready to suddenly go from doing elite sport to sitting at a desk revising for stuff. So that was really difficult. And then that year that I had to appeal to get back in. They tried to get rid of me, but I kind of forced myself back in. And then
was that I've been to the Olympics? Look at this. Look at my medal.
I wish it was. Actually, a lot of their argument was you spent too much time rowing rather than studying. I was like, I didn't do any rowing. I could literally count the hands. I'd probably been in a boat maybe like 8 or 10 times in the entire year. I was like, I'm telling you, if I'd done loads of rowing and that was the reason why I failed, I'd tell you, because that would be an excuse. Like that would be a reason. Like that wasn't the reason. The reason was I wasn't good enough. I didn't do the revision. I didn't get, I wasn't working in the right way.
I know a rower I rode with, I won't name who it is, who was pulled over on the motorway speeding by a policeman. And then when the guy started to talk to him, he was like, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I haven't been in the country for ages. I've been up the mountain somewhere. So I've not been at the Olympics. Winter Olympics." And he got away with it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it worked.
I've never tried that. I need to. But I mean, it's so difficult to do that medicine degree, especially because I had this grad entry degree, which is a condensed course. And I mean, Alex, my husband, did it, and he's one of the smartest people I know, and he barely scraped through the medicine because he was so busy rowing. So, I think that is a real challenge. So, yeah, no, it wasn't that. I didn't do it right, and I did get back in to repeat the exams the following year, and then found out I had this brain tumor. Actually, basically, the reason why I found out was because I lost my student funding because I was technically not a student anymore. So my student funding was paused and I needed to make some money. So I was doing some coaching and I saw this research study. It was like £60 to sit and do something for a few hours and have a brain scan. And I was like, oh, that's good. That's a good shout. I'll do that. And then did the scan, got a call that night saying, listen, we've seen something on the scan. You need to come back and have a proper medical scan. And you find stuff on these kinds of scans all the time. Like if you both sat in an MRI scanner, they'd find something, and if it'd be insignificant, probably your back, I imagine, or
my back's absolutely
exactly
done. I'm a bit weird, definitely.
But so I wasn't that worried. I was like, oh, okay, it'll be something insignificant or a flare, an artifact from the scan or something. And the first tip that it wasn't, maybe it was serious or could be serious, was they called me. And they called me on a Thursday and said, we'll book you another MRI. And then they called me back the following morning, was like, your MRI's on Tuesday next week. I was like, they've really rushed that through that. This is something. And they found this big old tumour, which was a benign tumour, wasn't cancerous. But the problem with brain tumours is you have a limited space in your skull. So a benign tumour is going to kill you eventually because it's going to expand, it's going to bleed, it's going to... damage the brain to an extent that, it's going to get you. And they decided to operate on it. They operated in March, and they actually said that if it hadn't been found until I'd started having symptoms, which probably would have been in the next couple of years, it probably would have been inoperable by the point they found it. And the operation that they said would take 4 to 6 hours ended up taking 13 because it was much more it had a lot more blood vessels than they thought. They had to really just spend a long time just delicately picking away at it, basically.
Wow.
So it was just it was really lucky. The whole thing was just it was an example of there's a reason why things happen. Like if I hadn't failed my first year of medical school, it wouldn't have happened. So I think it just, it was great luck, and it gave me a really good insight into being a patient, which I think as a doctor has been quite helpful.
Did you have any sort of recovery path coming back from this? Did that affect anything at all?
I mean, I was exhausted for a long time. I remember not being, just walking down the street to the shops was like a trial, basically. Sleeping was really hard because the cut was up the back of my neck and into my skull, and so I couldn't get comfortable. They cut through all my neck muscles, so I couldn't turn my head properly. So there was a lot. That was difficult, and I was sat in the recovery time. I didn't have a huge amount off because I had to then resit these medical school exams.
Yeah.
So I was sitting at home on my own trying to revise, knowing that this chance I had to sit my exams was my last chance. And if I didn't get it, I would be kicked out of medical school and no other medical school would take me. So that was my kind of career hope.
An ultimatum.
Yeah. So I think, so it was pretty, it was high stakes.
The kind of challenge that most people involved in high level sport are good at.
Exactly. And I felt like,
here we go.
And I felt like it was, that was it. It was like, well, okay, I'll just take it one day at a time. And this is what I have to do. And I'll just build my kind of goals around what I know I need to do at the end, essentially. But yeah, so they got most of it out. I then had, a few years later, I had a scammer knife, which is like radio surgery where they shoot lasers at the remnant. And that looks like it's worked and has kind of slowed any further growth. So it looks like hopefully it's dealt with. Haven't had missed my last MRI because Mr. here was in their cooking, and so they didn't want to do a scan on me. But yeah, I'm hoping the next scan, which will come up soon, will show that everything's kind of going in the right direction, basically.
How long ago was that?
My last scan would have been summer, maybe. So I was having 6 monthly scans. So I was due one in December, but I was like 7 weeks pregnant.
Yeah. And then since you first discovered that you had that?
So that is about 5 years ago. The tumour was operated on at the beginning of 2018. So that was a big year because so I had the operation. We did this Zambezi, this expedition in Zambia. We bought a house. We got married, had those big exams. It was all just like, it was a big busy year, basically.
Life happens when you finish rowing, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Same for me. You think, well, I'm spending 40, 50 hours a week of my life on rowing. Take rowing away.
Live with something else.
Well, first you're like, I'll have so much time. No, you won't.
You find things to do.
All those things that took a back seat to rowing now need to be done. So yeah, it happens. Yeah. And then, so obviously, yeah, you said you're doing the Chattercock stuff. Involvement otherwise in rowing? Seen you are you doing a bit of umpiring and stuff?
Some commentary stuff when I get asked to. I've been doing some senior umpiring for the Oxford Bump stuff, which basically I was tempted into because I get to fire a cannon.
Yeah.
And like, there's no other rowing events where you get to fire cannons. So.
Oh, you get to fire the cannon.
Yeah, exactly. Which is much smaller than I thought it was. In my head, I was like, oh, it's like a ship's cannon. It's going to be the size of this room. And it's actually like that big.
Yeah, that's fun.
It's really fun.
How did you find that event in general? I mean, were you involved in it at all while you were at Oxford?
I coached a bit of bumps racing. I did like the odd bumps race.
Because it's totally insane.
It's absolute chaos. I love it. And if anyone who's interested in rowing should come and watch it because it's just such a chaotic event. It's so much fun. And it's special because it gives so many people the chance to try rowing.
Yeah.
Who often will never do it ever again. They'll just do it for their time at university. But people just get so into it. I mean, it's just such a absolutely nutty event. But I think
great for coxes as well.
Great for coxes, but so much pressure on them.
Oh yeah.
But it is amazing, and I think it's about finding a way to just stay in touch with the sport. I think, like Alex, my husband, has been doing a lot of sort of stuff more from the medical side. So he does some stuff with Henry Royal, and he's been sort of safety officer for things like the beach sprints that was in Wales, last year. So you just kind of try and find a way to like stay connected and find your niche, really, which I think I'm still working on. I love doing the commentary and doing stuff like, working with the coxes and things. I think is a way that I feel like I can stay connected and kind of give something back to the sport, basically. Yeah. It's hard to find what works for you. And I think I'd love to row, but ultimately I'm a shift worker. So I can't even commit to doing like a regular Saturday morning because I could be working. So I think it's hard to commit from that side. So you've got to find another way in.
It's different in general, just like the attitude that's made us all good at rowing is the one that's difficult to control. So it's like, oh, I'd like to go for one row, but then one is two, and then I'm on the ergo.
You're doing a Henley campaign.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's finding like what works, what you've learned that works. And it's very cliched, like, sport, you learn all these transferable skills, but it's true, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think the big one for me, and it I know I've talked about a lot, is feedback. I found in medicine, one of the hardest things is getting decent feedback. And like quite often, I feel like people seem to think that when I'm asking for feedback, I'm asking for a compliment. So if I'll say like, am I actually doing a good job? Like, am I an okay doctor? Yeah, of course. I'm like, no, I'm not asking. I don't want reassurance. I genuinely want to be better at my job. It's so hard to actually get because people are worried about offending.
The British are awful. The British are awful at it. Yeah, we're really, really bad at giving honest feedback or just feedback in general. Yeah. My wife's Czech. Yeah. So we go out to a restaurant. It's a food ain't out.
You need these people in your life, don't you?
Yeah, but like her exact point is, how does the restaurant learn? Yeah. How do they know their dish is bad? If I'm like, no, don't bother telling them out. Yeah, exactly. And it makes total sense, and we're really bad at it as a nation.
It's funny though, other people, if you ask for feedback, other people interpret that as asking for a compliment rather than criticism.
It's definitely like, and so I still sometimes I'm like, I still don't know if I'm doing a good job. Like, were you just being nice, or did you actually genuinely mean that?
Yeah, when like you said, you come from an environment that someone's just gonna tear you a new one. Yeah,
but it's also like part of your daily life, isn't it? Like, getting feedback is part of what you do every day.
It's frustrating as an athlete, or I'm sure as a coach as well. You never want on the turn for the coach to be like, right, 3. You're like, damn, I messed up. But then at the same time, you do want it in a certain way. You're like, but I do want to know. And like, it's 50-50, isn't it? It's a constant battle, but there's no progress.
So I remember someone saying, I want to know that I'm the worst person in the boat, because then I know that, everyone else is brilliant and I'm,
The best position to be is last. It's the most stressful because, but then you're rowing with a boat.
The best people.
Yeah. No, it's really good.
Awesome. I think I've got some quick fire questions for you. Number 1, what are some of your favorite coxing calls? You said that you've had some questionable calls, some cool sounding calls, a mixture of them.
I think that Europeans one, I think just like, it's not cool. It's just what came out of me at the time. I think it's just, it's just being in the moment. And I think I can't remember like a cool call I've ever made that has sounded good. I can remember the ones that I've made that had a bad impact probably more than anything, but I don't think I've got one. Yeah. I think it is literally just whatever comes out at the time.
I think that's like, just as what you said is an awesome piece of advice. Like, I don't remember the cool ones. Yeah. So stop focusing on them. I remember the bad ones, but I probably should forget them. Yeah. And the ones that stick out to you most is like when you were or just authentically being you. I think that's fantastic advice for any cop.
Awesome. So one more question. Out of all the venues that you've trained at, visited or raced at, what are some of your favorites in rowing?
Abyss. We used to go there for training camps, and partly because the hotel was great and the food was great and the people were great. And you could just walk down to the lake and you could go in any direction and go for miles and miles, didn't have to turn around. So that was definitely my favorite place to train. Racing, I'm a tideway girl at heart. Like, that's where I learned to row. That's where I've had some of my best and worst rowing experiences. So I think that's still one of my favorite places. And partly because it scares other people. It scares other coxers, and I know that, like, I'm happy there, basically. So I think those are probably my faves.
Okay. Well, the tideway definitely scares me. I mean, the other day I was told by a boatman down at the tideway that he's going to let me out in a single if I want to. But I'm thinking in my head, like, on the tideway, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. Question I love to answer is if you could travel back in time to the you that really fell, that point in your life when you really fell in love with rowing, when you got hooked and the bug has caught you, you could travel back in time now and speak to that young kid and give them some advice. What advice would you give them?
I think it would be to just roll with the punches, essentially. Like, a lot of people say, what would you do differently with that 2012 boat race? And actually, part of me knows the answers to what I do. But if I hadn't have had that result, Alex and I wouldn't have got so close. We wouldn't have been together. This little noisy bean wouldn't be here. So I think there's, like, everything happens for a reason, right? So I would just say, just go with it and just keep knocking your head against the brick wall. And so there are a lot of times it took me a long time to get where I wanted to be, and you just have to keep going.
Yeah, you're a product of all your experiences,
exactly.
and your successes later in your career are as a result of your early failures. And then no one got anywhere without screwing up.
Yeah.
And then the quote I like is the difference between a beginner and a master is the master's failed more times than the beginner's even tried. And if you think you're going to become a master without failing, you've got another thing coming. It's not going to happen.
Failing at keeping this one quiet right now. I am being punched in the throat, which is nice.
So, one last question is, who are some of your rowing idols or people that you've looked up to during your career?
My 2016 crew, without a doubt, those guys, they're just some amazing athletes, people, and it is I think the people that I idolize the most are the people that I've rowed with. My 2012 boat race crew, my husband Alex, like some of the stuff these people have achieved, whether or not it's an Olympic medal or, getting through med school while doing the boat race, or, those are the things that I really respect. People like, like Jack Beaumont, like he's an incredible athlete, he's an incredible guy. John Collins keeps coming back. It's those guys. I think, those are the people that I see, and I just think these are amazing athletes and just brilliant people to be around.
Shout out to both of them. We've had them both on the podcast, and we'll try and get that again. Zoe, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been really interesting to hear about what makes an incredible Cox and how to overcome challenges that most people probably will not know exist in the coxing world. Because, like we said, it's very easy to give coxers feedback, and things to improve is not always very easy to give them praise. There's also really good to know what to give them praise for and what it's actually from your perspective. So this was great, and thank you so much for coming on. Yeah,
it was great. Thank you for having us and putting up with the screaming.
Yeah, both of you. No, that's like you said, your advice, roll with the punches. You've got to deal with these things. But yeah, no, I really appreciate you coming on. It's awesome to be able to come over, some of our own shared memories, which have been really fun, and I think just so helpful. Part of why we're doing this is to get people to understand that everyone has setbacks, and the road to success is paved in all sorts of other things. And I think it's advice, some really, really good advice, and some really awesome things that we've gone through and spoken about. So, and just interesting, things that you don't know. It's awesome. From our perspective, if no one else listens, I had a great time.
It's nice to talk about rowing for a while and not how many times the baby's pooed today. So it's been good for me as well.
Well, we'll get you back on. Maybe we can do a bit of a coxing chat.
Yeah.
And get people on.
A panel, I think that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got 6 mics.
Perfect.
At some point.
Awesome. So on that note, easy there.
Cue the music.